Chapter 579. Ajin killed the two dark magicians neatly, without leaking any aura. The giant demon seagull seemed to have disappeared in the mist. The male dark magician was not weak, with 7 crowns, while the female dark magician was only 4 crowns. In front of Ajin, they didn't even have a chance to attack. Ji Dong and the other 2 dark magicians were fully covered by the soul fusion. In addition, the 2 dark magicians were completely immersed in their desires, and only after their souls were locked did they realize that they couldn't send any messages. Ajin waved her hand coldly. From the looks of it, it was obvious that she felt that killing these 2 people would dirty her hands. The heavenly stem holy disciples could not help but smile. Yao Qianshu even muttered to himself, making love at an altitude of 3,000 meters. I can't believe they could think of that. However, it seems maybe it's really exciting. Lang Tianyi grinned and said, "It's exciting, but it's also exciting to death." Who would have thought that the mist released by our sacred evolution fire dragon would be regarded as the originally tense atmosphere relax a lot because of this little interlude? At this time, the mist formed by the sacred evolution fire dragon was gradually approaching the edge of the holy evil island towards the 5 elements continent. However, Ji Dong didn't dare to be careless. Dark Tianji was at the peak of the sacred level. His soul could even scan the entire holy evil island. Before they actually landed on the 5 elements continent, they were still in danger. At this time, the sky in the distance gradually turned white, and the dark sky gradually turned dark blue. Dawn was coming. Ji Dong chose to take action after midnight, because this was the time when people were most likely to slack off. Dawn was the time when people who stayed up all night were the most tired, so the defense was naturally the most relaxed at this time. Finally, when the sun in the distance revealed a touch of red, they were out of the holy evil island. The 5 elements continent was already in front of them. The feeling of watching the sunrise from the sky was very special. The beauty could not be experienced from the ground, and the mood of the saints was just like the sunrise, full of vitality. They had succeeded. They had finally succeeded. No matter how powerful Dark Tianji was, it was impossible for him to make such a huge island impenetrable. In these 3 days, Ji Dong had thought of several possible methods. The final 2 choices were to go up into the sky and into the ground. After weighing the pros and cons, he finally chose to go up into the sky. This way, it would be easier for them to adapt to the situation. At the very least, the dark heavenly stem saint would not be able to rush over immediately. They could at least resist Dark Tianji for a while. Darkness Seer's other judgments were correct, but unfortunately, he did not know that his son had not betrayed his partner, but his father, who had killed his daughter-in-law. The morale of the Light Church and the holy disciples did not suffer a heavy blow, which was why they were able to transmigrate again in 3 days. They really succeeded. Looking from a sky, at least on the surface, there was no difference between the 5 elements continent and the 5 elements continent. They were both boundless continents. Close to the holy evil island, there were a large number of buildings and residences. Although there were no city walls, it was like a huge city, because the heavenly stem saints were surprised to find that this city was even bigger than the largest city in the 5 elements continent. If one observed carefully, they would discover that this was not an ordinary city, but a city that was completely prepared for war. In this huge city, the most that could be seen were the munitions factories. As for everything else, it was obvious that they were all prepared for war without having to look. After careful observation, Ji Dong discovered that this enormous city was at least twice the size of Central Plain City, and it was completely prepared for war. This definitely wasn't something that could be completed in a day or 2, or even a year or 2. The Dark 5 Elements continent's preparations for the Holy War in a year and a half were far too ample. Tianji sighed slightly. This is the nature of aggression. Du Ming said eagerly, "Teacher, should we make this city our target? Destroy all the munitions factories here and kill those factories. When the Holy War starts, the 5 Elements continent will be weakened." Ji Dong frowned. He glared at Du Ming and said, "No, we're too close to the holy evil island. Once we start, the dark divination and dark heavenly stem saints will be able to get here. Also, remember what I said before, we're here to kill the leader. Even though the Five Elements Dark Continent is our enemy, the people of the Five Elements Dark Continent are also humans. We can't kill the innocent. Therefore, we're only here to destroy the enemy's magicians. As for the ordinary civilians and even the soldiers, we can't easily kill them. We're here to kill as few people as possible, not to bring misery to the Five Elements Dark Continent. Hearing Jidong's words, Tianji nodded in agreement. That's right, we can't kill ordinary civilians. If we kill innocent people, what's the difference between that and Dark Tianji? Duming hurriedly nodded and didn't dare to say anything else. Although they couldn't make a move here, they were still out of the range of Dark Tianji's detection. Jidong ordered the Sacred Evolution Flaming Dragon to speed up. Still under the cover of the clouds, they flew rapidly towards the depths of the Five Elements Dark Mainland. Now that they had finally entered the Five Elements Dark Mainland, Jidong's plan was about to truly begin. This time, they were truly like fish in the ocean and birds in the sky. It would be extremely difficult for Dark Tianji to catch them again. From the beginning to the end, Jidong's advantage was the Red Lotus Heavenly Fire left behind by the Flaming Bar. With the Red Lotus Heavenly Fire as a cover, they could completely do whatever they wanted in the next 1.5 years. They didn't need to worry about the Five Elements Dark Mainland, their main camp being attacked by the Five Elements Dark Mainland. This was also why Jidong insisted on this trip. If they missed this opportunity, there would definitely be huge casualties on both sides, regardless of who would win or lose. What he wanted was not just to defeat his opponent, but to completely defeat his opponent. Only then could he end the war in the shortest time possible and solve the biggest problem in his heart as soon as possible. The pitiful Dark Tianji and Dark Heavenly Stem's holy disciples still had no idea that their greatest opponent had already sneaked into their territory. For the sake of caution, Jidong commanded the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon to fly inland of the Five Elements continent for 3 whole days before it gradually slowed down and lowered its altitude in search of the nearest city. After all, the Five Elements continent was extremely unfamiliar to them. Only by going to the city would they be able to obtain the information they wanted. Searching from the sky was naturally very convenient. In less than an hour, the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon had already discovered a relatively large city. Under Jidong's instructions, it landed on a mountain not far from the city. Only then did Jidong get his companions to release the magical beasts that they had stored in their respective storage magical artifacts. They once again opened up a space for them to rest in the Five Elements continent. After all, storage magical artifacts were not suitable places for magical beasts to rest in under normal circumstances. The narrow space was extremely painful for them. Only the combination of the Eclipse Phoenix and the Vermilion Burr Bracelet, or the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon and the Core of Life, could keep them in there for a long period of time without harming them. The tense atmosphere when they first entered the Five Elements continent had long since disappeared as they ventured inland. The Heavenly Stem Saints were clearly a little excited. They were all young people, so the feeling of being deep behind enemy lines easily excited them. Du Exine excitedly asked Hyoheim, "Teacher Jidong, what should we do next? Can we start the operation and kill the demon masters of the Five Elements continent?" Jidong said, "No, we can't alert them yet. Before we start the operation, we still have something important to do, and that is to help Du Ming and Bauer obtain the divine artifacts that belong to them. Once we have all 10 divine artifacts, we will truly have the strength to fight against the Heavenly Stem Saints and the Dark Secrets Divination. Let's go. We will first go to the city in front of us to find out more information. Most importantly, we need to buy a more detailed map of the Five Elements continent. That way, our operation will be more successful." At that moment, everyone put away their mounts and, under Jidong's lead, left the mountain under their feet and advanced toward the seemingly large city. As they got closer to the city, everyone began to feel that something was amiss. This feeling came from the surrounding environment. They had already walked on the official road, but although this official road was wide, it was full of potholes, completely showing that it had been in disrepair for a long time. There were no trees on either side of the official road, and at a glance, it was full of undulating farmlands. A large number of farmers were farming in them. Logically speaking, with so many farmlands, the farmers' lives should be very good. But looking at these farmers who were working, they were all emaciated and malnourished. When they arrived in front of the city, this strange feeling became even more intense. Although the city in front of them couldn't be compared to the capitals of the empires in the Five Elements continent, it should be at the level of a main city from the sky. However, when they arrived in front of the city, everyone found that the city walls were very dilapidated. No matter how they looked at it, it was extremely old. Some of the city walls had even collapsed, but there were no signs of repair. There were very few soldiers patrolling the city walls, and there were no soldiers guarding the city gates at all. Most of the passers-by also looked dispirited. If this kind of situation appeared in a poor village, everyone naturally wouldn't find it strange, but in front of them was clearly a main city. How could it be so dilapidated? In the radiant Five Elements continent, even a very small, ordinary city was much better than this place. Jidong and Tianji looked at each other, both seeing the doubt in each other's heart. Everyone also followed them into the city. The situation inside the city looked similar to the outside. Most of the buildings were very old, and many of them seemed to have been in disrepair for many years. Buildings with more than 2 floors were almost extinct, and most of them were dilapidated bungalows. The number of shops on both sides of the street was also a few times less than that of a normal main city. Jidong walked in front of a shop, stopped, and signaled his companions to wait for him here. He walked into the shop, and there was only a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s, leaning on the counter drowsily. "Hello, may I ask, do you have a map of the continent for sale here?" From the outside, this should be a general store, so Jidong came in to inquire, but when he walked in, he found that the goods inside were pitifully few. The shop owner raised his head, and seeing Hyoheim move, he suddenly shivered, hurriedly stood up, and respectfully saluted Hyoheim, saying, Welcome to our little shop. What do you need?" Looking at his humble appearance, Jidong couldn't help but be surprised, and said, "What, Lord? Don't tell me you know me?" This was simply the biggest joke in the world. He had just arrived at the Five Elements continent. How could someone know him? This lord made him scratch his head in confusion. The shop owner hurriedly said, "How could this lowly one be lucky enough to know Lord? But looking at Lord's attire and appearance, you must be Sir Devil Master." "Oh, you can see that I am a Devil Master?" Jidong asked curiously. He felt that he had concealed his own aura very well. The shop owner respectfully said, "Of course, Sir Devil Masters are naturally different from us. Long live Sir Tianji. Long live Sir Devil Master. Take whatever you want. This is the honor of this little shop." Jidong could see that this shop owner was very afraid of him, which made him even more puzzled. He indifferently said, "I just want to know how you can see that I am a Devil Master at a glance. Tell me the truth, otherwise." Hearing this, the shop owner suddenly shivered in fear. With a plop, he actually knelt in front of Jidong, and with a snot and tears, he said, "Sir Devil Master, please let me go. I really didn't mean to offend you." Aside from Sir Devil Master, who else could have such a handsome appearance? A cold light flashed in Jidong's eyes, and a trace of soul force floated out, enveloping the shop owner's body, and said, "Look at me." The shop owner raised his head, and when he saw Jidong's eyes, he only felt dizzy, and everything in front of him was silver. Jidong said, "Speak. How did you know that I am a Devil Master?" He had to figure this out. The shop owner in front of him was clearly an ordinary civilian, and there was not a trace of magical fluctuation in his body. If such a person could recognize his identity as a Devil Master, how could he be at ease if he didn't figure this out? Chapter 580. The shop owner's mind was completely controlled by Jidong. He murmured, "Because only Lord Magician can wear such gorgeous clothes. Only Lord Magician and the army can eat their fill. Looking at your complexion and clothes, I can only guess that you are Lord Magician." Jidong said in surprise, "Could it be that besides Magician and the army, you commoners don't even have enough to eat? Are there no nobles in your city?" "Nobles? What's that? The shop owner had a blank look on his face as he said, Lord Divinity said that all living beings are equal. Only by paying more can we obtain more. The demon masters and the army want to protect our continent, so of course they have to provide for us with the best things. The reason why we, the commoners, are able to survive is because of their grace. Everything we do is to serve the demon masters and the army. Since 10 years ago, when the Holy War was announced, the taxes that we originally had to pay doubled. Other than the demon masters and the army, even the city lords don't have enough to eat. There are people dying of hunger every day. After hearing the shop owner's words, Jidong finally understood what he was looking at in front of him. The so-called 1,000 years of accumulation of dark Tianji was actually obtained like this. It was actually obtained by exploiting the commoners. This was really a big shock to him. Do you have a map of the continent? Jidong asked in a deep voice. Yes. Under Jidong's order, the shop owner stood up shakily. He took out a somewhat tattered map of the continent from the cabinet behind him and respectfully handed it to Jidong. Jidong didn't know what the currency of the Dark Five Elements continent looked like. Naturally, he couldn't pay the shop owner. He erased the shop owner's memory and left. Jidong was greeted by the solemn expressions of the heavenly stem saints. Although he had entered alone earlier, he had shared the situation inside with his companions through soul sharing. Naturally, his companions had heard everything that he had heard. Tianji frowned and said, I didn't expect it to be like this. I didn't expect the Five Elements continent to be completely different from what we imagined. That's right, it was completely different. Before coming here, the Heavenly Stem Saints had an extremely high estimation of the location of the Five Elements continent. With the power of the Dark Seers, the power of the Heavenly Stem Saints, and the millions of well-equipped Dark Army on the Sacred Evil Island, everything proved to them how powerful and prosperous the Five Elements continent was. However, when they actually arrived here, they were shocked to find that everything was different from what they had imagined. Not only was there no prosperity, but it was also a wasteland. In terms of prosperity, the darkness was far inferior to the light. Yao Qianshu said, could it be that this is only the case in this city or in this area? After all, this place isn't too far from the front line. Jidong said in a deep voice, if that's the case, then it's fine. But if the entire Five Elements continent is like this, then the first to suffer is not the Five Elements continent of light, but the Five Elements continent itself. Meow Meow asked Hyoheim, then what should we do now? Ever since she found out that Fury had gone to the infernal affairs, although she was no longer angry, her beautiful face always carried a faint layer of worry. Jidong said, everything goes according to the original plan. At the same time, since the Five Elements continent is far beyond our expectations, we also have to investigate this continent carefully. There's still a lot of time, so there's no need to rush. If the Five Elements continent is really like this, then we can at least be sure of one thing, that is, Dark Tianji and his Dark Army are weak. With such a poor situation in the Five Elements continent, even if he has more troops at hand, it's impossible for him to carry out a protracted war. That's an army of millions. The daily consumption is astronomical, and these consumption comes from the civilians in front of us who can't even eat their fill. Originally, I didn't have much confidence, but now it seems that our chances in this holy war are actually not small. Dark Tianji is probably coveting our Radiance continent because the situation of the Dark continent is not optimistic. His idea must be to use war to nurture war, attack our Five Elements continent as soon as possible, and launch a further war through plundering. Dark Tianji may be an ambitious and ruthless person, but he is by no means a good talent for governing a country. Or, in a situation like his, no one would dare to help him govern the continent. Moreover, this situation is definitely not caused by the first generation of Tianji. He claimed to have sacrificed 10 generations of Tianji to create this opportunity. It seems that the civilians of the Five Elements continent have also gone through 10 generations of pain. The Heavenly Stem Saints nodded one after another. If the Darkness continent was really like what they saw in front of them, then compared to the Radiance continent, the five-element continent's foundation was much deeper. Of course, this would only be meaningful if the Radiance continent could drag the war into a protracted war after the start of the war. Judging from the current situation, this was impossible. Ji Dong said, "What we see now makes the situation even more complicated. It's still too early for us to think about this. We still have to take a look at this darkness five-elements continent first. Let's go. We'll find a quiet place to rest and study the map of this darkness continent." After all, this was a main city. Although it was run down, it was not too difficult to find a hotel. Very soon, everyone found a hotel with bungalows. A scene very similar to before appeared. When they walked into the hotel, there was no need to say anything at all. The hotel owner and the only waiter immediately greeted them and respectfully arranged their accommodation for them. There was no mention of collecting money at all. Compared to the hotels in the five-elements continent, the decorations here were outrageously simple. Fortunately, it was still clean. As the saying went, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Moreover, the Saints of Light had such an important mission, so they naturally would not be entangled in these external things and would make do with it. Ji Dong gathered his companions in his small room. When everyone entered the room, Yao Qianshu smiled and said, "The feeling of this five-element continent is not bad. It's simply a paradise for the Devil Masters. When the Devil Masters come here, they're like big bosses. It seems that they don't have to pay for anything. The Devil Masters of the five-element continent are really blessed." Tianji glanced at Yao Qianshu and said, "Do you know what this situation means?" Yao Qianshu was stunned for a moment and said, "It's a waste of manpower and money. It means that the ordinary people are living in poverty." Tianji shook his head. Sitting on the chair, Ji Dong said, "This means that the number of magicians in the dark elemental continent will far exceed our expectations. Along the way, I've observed carefully. In this city, the number of young adults is actually very small. Before we entered the city, among the farmers on the road, there were also very few young adults. I've thought about it carefully. This means two things. First, all the young adults have probably thrown themselves into the great cause of the dark elemental continent. If you were a resident of this city, living on this continent, what would you do when you have children? In order to excel, in order to have enough to eat and live a good life, then there would only be two choices. The first choice would naturally be to become a magician. If I'm not wrong, in this dark elemental continent, there must be a more systematic and stricter way of selecting magicians than in our light elemental continent. Furthermore, they are definitely everywhere and are all controlled by the dark heavenly secrets. In order to survive and live a better life, as long as they have the slightest bit of talent as an evil master, they will probably put in all their effort to cultivate under the supervision of their families in order to rise to the top. As for those youths who are unable to cultivate to become an evil master, in order to eat their fill and wear warm clothes, the other path is to become a soldier. Although it will be a bumpy journey, the army will definitely be able to feed them. Tianji continued, "In this case, I'm afraid we have to reevaluate the five elements dark continent. If all the cities in the five elements dark continent are like this one, then the total number of magicians and armies in the five elements dark continent would be much more terrifying than we expected. I'm afraid that Tianji has purposely created such a system. He would rather expend the vitality of the entire continent in order to build a powerful and terrifying military force. As the ruler and faith of this military force, as long as he can invade our five elements dark continent, then everything will be fine." Yao Qianshu sucked in a breath of cold air and said, "That fellow, Dark Secrets, is simply too terrifying. I'm afraid only he could come up with such a method to end the clan. I'm very glad that I was born in the radiant five elements continent. Although in terms of military strength, we're much weaker than the dark five elements continent, the 100 years of peace have made our continent full of vitality. Although it can't be said that there are no filthy places compared to the life here, it's simply the difference between heaven and hell." Ji Dong spread out the map he had bought on the bed and pointed at it. In terms of area, the five elements continent is smaller than the five elements continent, about 1/3 smaller. On the surface, it seems that this continent is also divided into 5 countries. Even the names of the countries are similar to ours. The characters are slightly different, but the differences are not big and can be vaguely recognized. In fact, the countries here are meaningless. Everything revolves around this place. As he spoke, Jidong raised his hand and patted the center of the map. Everyone focused their attention there and saw that it was an area completely covered in black. There were no other distinctions on it, only the simplest words, Dark Temple. This must be the lair of Dark Tianji. All the orders to control the 5 elements continent come from here. It is also here that they control the most powerful force on this continent and have ruled this continent for thousands of years. At the same time, this will be our first target. Jidong's finger pointed heavily at the area of the Dark Temple. Hearing Jidong's words, Lang Tiany's eyes lit up and he said, "Young master, are we going to destroy their foundation first?" Jidong smiled and said, "Of course, this is one of the reasons. Now is a good opportunity for us. Because Senior sent a message to Dark Tianji, asking him to lead the Dark Heavenly Stem Saints to stop us on the Holy Evil Island. Even though we were prepared, Dark Tianji did bring us a lot of trouble. It was not easy for us to break through the encirclement and enter the 5 elements continent. However, from the moment we broke through the barrier and entered the 5 elements continent, the initiative was already in our hands. We didn't let everyone take action in advance because we want to take a look at Dark Tianji's lair first. There are several advantages to doing this. First, Dark Tianji and the Dark Heavenly Stem Saints are not here. For us, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. How can we not leave a mark on the Dark Temple? Hearing Jidong's words, everyone couldn't help but smile. Jidong continued, "Secondly, there must be a large number of Devil Masters stationed in the Dark Temple. Those who can be stationed there must be loyal to Dark Tianji. They are the most devout followers of Dark Tianji. We won't have any psychological burden to kill them. Thirdly, which is also the most important point, the 2 light water divine weapons must be hidden in the Dark Temple by Dark Tianji. This will also be our primary target. If we don't attack the Dark Temple as soon as possible, we may not have a chance in the future. It is because of these reasons that I set this place as our first target. Before we achieve this goal, we must not expose ourselves. If anyone has any suggestions, please bring them up immediately and we will discuss them together." Ajin was the first to shake his head and said indifferently, "I'm only in charge of killing people. The rest is your business." Chen Sichuan smiled faintly and did not say anything. However, her gaze remained fixed on Jidong from beginning to end. Yao Qianshu smiled and said, "Since Jidong has thought things through so thoroughly, I don't have any objections. However, Tianji, can you help us predict the fortune or misfortune of this trip?" Tianji nodded slightly. He raised his hands and pressed them in the air. At the same time, he retracted his hands and tapped his forehead gently. Immediately, the eye of Tianji that was hidden between his brows opened silently. A faint splendor appeared out of nowhere. As the eye of Tianji opened, Tianji's gaze immediately became blank, but there seemed to be a special light shining in his eyes, as if he was staring at a faraway place. The heavenly stem holy disciples focused their attention and waited quietly. After a long while, Tianji tapped his right index finger on the eye of Tianji. All the splendor disappeared at the same time. He let out a long breath and nodded at Hyoheim. He said 4 words. Chapter 581. More daunting than dangerous. After Tianji finished his prediction, he let out a long sigh. Hearing Tianji's words, Jidong's eyes shone with power. After sweeping his companions' faces one by one, he solemnly said, "We'll set out tonight." At this time, a sudden clamor of footsteps came from outside, attracting everyone's attention. A sharp voice shouted, "What? No rooms? How can there be no rooms in this broken place? If there aren't any, then make room for us. We are Lord Dark Prophet's closest subordinates. Do you see that? Only members of our Dark Sacrificial Assembly can wear the Dark Medallion. Those ordinary magicians are nothing. Tell them to scram. We'll reserve this place." Damn it. What kind of broken place is this? There isn't even a decent place to stay. Lord Dark Sacrificial Assembly, but a loud bang was followed by a miserable scream. Clearly, the so-called Dark Sacrificial Assembly had made a move. But my ass, If you don't hurry up and delay our rest, I'll skin you alive and let you have a taste of the dark sacrificial assembly." Hearing the clamor outside, the heavenly gone saints couldn't help but focus their gazes on Ji Dong, waiting for his decision. Ji Dong indifferently smiled. "Since someone has sent us a message, why do we need to be polite? Let's go out and take a look. Don't let anyone escape." When Ji Dong said the last word, the heavenly gone saints felt their minds clear up. Ji Dong's spiritual connection had been completed, linking everyone's soul force together. This was something that even Tianji, whose soul force was stronger than Ji Dong's, would find difficult to accomplish. This was also the signal that the battle was about to begin. With Ji Dong's soul force as the command, the heavenly gone saints could not only display their full strength, but they could even display 120% of their strength. Ji Dong was the first to push open the door and walk out. The heavenly stem holy disciples followed closely behind. Everyone walked out of Tianji. Even though Ji Dong could sense that the enemies in front of him weren't very powerful, he still enveloped the entire hotel with his soul power. This was the 5 elements continent of darkness. Any carelessness could expose his identity. It was better to be safe than sorry. The layout of this hotel was too simple. It was like a courtyard house in Ji Dong's previous life. There were only a dozen rooms in total. It was no wonder that Ji Dong and the others were full after they checked in. As soon as they stepped out of the door, Ji Dong saw the source of the noise outside. A total of a dozen tall men in black, wearing pointed black hats and calf leather boots, were standing in the courtyard, showing off their might. As for the owner of the hotel who had brought Ji Dong and the others in, he was moaning on the ground. Not far from where he had fallen, there were a few bloody teeth on the ground. The only waiter was trembling beside him. He was so scared that his face was pale. He was trying his best to hide the hatred in the depths of his eyes. Ji Dong glanced at the waiter. Then, his gaze landed on the strangely dressed men in black. When the men in black saw Ji Dong and the others, they immediately shifted their gazes. The leader of the men in black looked to be in his 30s. His gloomy face looked a little pale. His slanted eyebrows were arched, giving off a bad impression of him. "You're the ones who occupied our place?" The leader sized up Ji Dong and the heavenly stem saints. The other men in black behind him didn't seem nervous because of Ji Dong and the others' appearance. The heavenly stem saints behind Ji Dong stood a little apart. Ji Dong looked back at the room he had walked out of. Then, he looked at the man in black and said, "Is your name written on this room?" The black-clothed man was stunned for a moment, and the other black-clothed men behind him were also stunned. They looked at Ji Dong as if they were looking at an idiot, and the black-clothed man in the lead could not help but say, "Do you know who we are?" Ji Dong smiled indifferently and said, "Didn't you just introduce yourselves? Dark Sacrificial Group, right?" The man in black flew into a rage and said, "Bastard, since you know we're Dark Sacrificial Group, you still dare to speak to us like this. I think you're tired of living. Tell me, which high priest are you under? All of you kneel down. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite." Ji Dong smiled, revealing a mouthful of white and neat teeth, and said, "I want to see how impolite you can be." The man in black had clearly never encountered such a situation. After being stunned for a moment, he raised his hands at the same time and slapped the void towards Ji Dong. 2 blue flames swept out and went straight towards Ji Dong's chest. A black halo condensed above his head. It was 5 crowns and 3 stars, indicating that he was level 56. Different from the demon masters of the 5 elements continent, the yin-yang crown of the demon masters of the 5 elements continent wasn't surrounded by golden light, but gray. This was also the easiest way to distinguish the demon masters of the 2 continents. Seeing the 2 blue flames coming towards him, the smile on Ji Dong's face couldn't help but become even wider. He raised his right hand slightly and beckoned forward. The 2 intense blue flames seemed to have found their source and flowed into Ji Dong's right palm and disappeared. Under the surprised gaze of the other party, Ji Dong said indifferently, "Leave this one." The men in black felt their legs go soft at the same time. Their bodies had sunk into the mud from the waist down. In their shock, how could these demon masters, who were only around 4 crowns on average, display their full strength? In reality, even if they did display their full strength, it wouldn't matter. The cold light brought with it a muffled groan. Other than the demon master that Hyoheim had attacked, the other men in black had all collapsed. Each of their foreheads had a hole the size of a fingertip, but strangely, no blood flowed out. The ones who had attacked were Meow Meow and Du Ming. Any one of them could have easily taken care of the problem, but the two of them were obviously faster. As for the leader of the men in black, he was already in Ji Dong's hands. Ji Dong's god-destroying attraction was not something that anyone could resist. With a casual grab, Ji Dong had already grabbed the man's neck. The man in black looked at the demon masters in front of him in horror, but he couldn't make a sound. He couldn't even struggle. The owner of the hotel, who had been lying on the ground moaning, was now so scared that his face was pale. He couldn't even make a sound. On the other side, the waiter was still standing there, trembling. Ji Dong turned to Ajin and said, "Take out their crystal crowns. Meow Meow, you take care of the rest." After saying this, Ji Dong waved his other hand at the waiter. The waiter screamed and tried to struggle, but how could she break free from Ji Dong's grasp? In the next moment, she was grabbed by the neck by Ji Dong, just like the man in black. The Heavenly Stem holy disciples cooperated very well. In a flash, Ajin had already circled around the group of dead men in black. Her movements were extremely fast. She pressed on the head of every demon master, and naturally, a dark crystal crown condensed from demonic power was sucked out. By the time Ajin returned to the group, the ground seemed to have opened its mouth and easily swallowed up the dozen or so corpses. Then, it naturally flattened out, leaving not a single trace behind. Tianji very naturally walked up to the owner of the hotel. He looked at him gently and said softly, "Sleep. Everything will be over once you sleep." The hotel owner's eyes immediately glazed over, and he slowly closed his eyes. Yao Qinshu picked up the 3 teeth that he had dropped earlier, walked up to the hotel owner, and squatted down. Under the comfort of the faint green light, not only did the wounds on the hotel owner's face heal, even the 3 teeth were put back in place. Then, Yao Qinshu carried the hotel owner's body and walked to the front. He placed him behind the counter and had him lie down on the counter. The entire process was carried out at the same time. From start to finish, it only took a total of 7.5 minutes. This was also because of Yao Qinshu's treatment. The cooperation of the Heavenly Stem holy disciples was as smooth as flowing water, and no one was surprised at all. It was as if all of this had been planned. After years of training, the Heavenly Stem holy disciples had finally become a true team, not only in terms of fighting, but also in other aspects of cooperation. Ji Dong carried the black-clothed man and the 13 or 16-year-old waitress into the room. With a thought, several meridians in their bodies were sealed, and the black-clothed man was thrown into the corner of the room like a broken sack. Then, he placed the waitress on the chair that he had been sitting on before. "Speak, who are you?" Ji Dong asked the waitress. The waitress's body trembled. Her eyes were filled with fear as she looked at Ji Dong. Because of fear, her teeth were constantly chattering, but she couldn't speak. Ji Dong furrowed his brows and said, "All right, stop pretending. In front of me, all of this is meaningless. As such a young triple-crown demon master, do you think you can only be a waiter here? Continuing to pretend won't do you any good. Do you want to become a corpse like those black-clothed men?" The waitress's eyes were very big. She looked at Ji Dong, and her body finally stopped trembling. "How do you know that I'm a triple-crowned devil master?" Previously, when the Heavenly Stem holy disciples had checked in, she had always been a yes man and didn't speak much. Now, when she spoke, her voice was clear and crisp, and it was very comfortable to listen to. Her eyes, which had been filled with fear before, also became lively. Her light pink eyes were very spirited, and it didn't match her ordinary appearance. Ji Dong said indifferently, "Not only do I know that you are a devil master, but I also know that you are wearing a disguise. Do you want me to help you remove it, or do you want to remove it yourself?" As he spoke, he flicked his finger lightly, and had already removed the restriction on the young girl's body. If a young girl with only 3 crowns could escape in front of a radiant Heavenly Stem holy king, that would be the biggest joke in the world. The young girl snorted, But in the end, she still didn't dare to disobey Ji Dong's orders. Her right hand reached into her chest from her collar, as if searching for something. Ji Dong frowned and immediately turned his body. He didn't want to take advantage of this young girl, not to mention that his companions were still here. A soft tearing sound rang out. When Ji Dong turned his head again, he saw that the young girl had already pulled off a layer of something that looked like human skin from her chest. Even her neck, cheeks, and even her hair were all removed. What an exquisite mask! Ji Dong couldn't help but praise it in his heart. If it wasn't for the young girl's eyes betraying her, perhaps Ji Dong wouldn't have been able to see any flaws. After the mask was taken off, the young girl's appearance changed drastically. The first thing that changed was her breasts that were no longer restrained. They instantly became plump, and the delicate skin on her neck was exposed. She also had a charming face that was both angry and happy at the same time. Although she was still young, she was a stunning beauty. However, the young girl was not content. The moment she took off the mask, she threw it at Ji Dong. At the same time, she pressed her hands against the chair, and a pair of powerful long legs directly kicked at Ji Dong's lower body. Her right hand supported her body, and her left hand directly grabbed at a pillar at the side of the bed. Her movements were not only fast, but also without the slightest bit of hesitation. It was extremely ruthless. If he were to hit someone and she succeeded in one move, it was guaranteed that he would lose his manhood. Unfortunately, her opponent was Ji Dong. This little trick was nothing in front of Ji Dong. Ji Dong just casually waved his hand, and the young girl felt her kicking legs instantly go numb. Her fingers were just a hair's breadth away from touching the pillar at the head of the bed. Her entire body fell heavily to the ground, and she was in a daze. The meridians that had been previously opened were once again sealed. At this time, the heavenly stem holy disciples outside had already walked in. With Ji Dong and Tianji's powerful soul force as a detection device, they didn't need to leave any extra people behind to scout. Seeing the young girl fall to the ground, Meow Meow couldn't help but laugh. Ji Dong, you really don't know how to have tender and protective feelings for the fairer sex. She's still so young. Can't you be a little gentler? Ji Dong raised his hand and used the God Annihilation Guide to grab the young girl again and stuffed her back into the chair. Don't think that she's not dangerous just because she's young. Little girl, I'm afraid that you've used that trick on many men. There must be many who have fallen for your trick too. The young girl glared fiercely at Ji Dong. However, she was so beautiful at her age, and her ferocious look was actually quite cute. I don't believe it. How could you have dodged it? With my looks, you stinky men will definitely be stunned when you see me, and then you'll definitely be kicked by me. As she spoke, she still had an indignant look on her face, as if she had been greatly wronged. She glared at Ji Dong, and her eyes seemed to be spitting fire. Chapter 582. Yao Qianshu laughed heartily and said, "This little girl isn't bad. She even has a good grasp of human nature. Looks like Ji Dong was right. This trick has worked many times before. Little girl, don't be unconvinced. Sichuan, show her how much you care about her." After entering the Five Elements continent, in order not to attract attention, Ji Dong had the girls cover their faces with veils. Otherwise, it would be too easy to be discovered when the five of them gathered together. Chen Sichuan walked to Ji Dong's side and glanced at him. Ji Dong nodded slightly. Chen Sichuan then took off the veil on her face, revealing her beautiful face that would make any woman jealous. The girl who had been very arrogant earlier couldn't help but fall into a daze when she saw Chen Sichuan's face. She had always thought that she was one of the most beautiful girls in the world. However, when she saw the Dong Mu Holy Maiden before her, the difference between a firefly and the bright moon made her feel so ashamed that she wanted to dig a hole and hide in it. Yao Qianshu chuckled and said, "Do you see that? This is our boss's confidant. With your looks, you want to seduce him? That's a fool's dream. Do you think he'll fall for it? Moreover, even if you really kick him, I'm afraid the one who falls will still be you." Ji Dong had an excellent grasp of people's psychology. For anyone, it was the easiest to break through the other party's psychological defenses by attacking the part that they were most proud of. It was precisely because of this that he allowed Chun Sichuan to see her face. The girl with long, dark purple hair was indeed stunned by Chun Sichuan's peerless beauty. Her breathing became noticeably faster, and her lips were tightly pursed. Although she refused to admit it verbally, she had already acknowledged Yao Qianshu's words in her heart. Yes, how could a man who had such a perfect confidant be swayed by her beauty? Ji Dong pulled a chair over and sat in front of the girl so that she could look at him at the same level. He smiled and said, "I think we can talk now. First, I need to know your background." The girl coldly snorted and turned her head away, not even looking at Ji Dong. To Ji Dong, dealing with this kind of little girl was a piece of cake. He nodded and said, "You don't want to say it? It's fine if you don't say it now. You will say it later anyway. I have countless ways to make you talk." The girl's personality was very unyielding. She said angrily, "If you want to kill me, do whatever you want. Don't even think about it if you want to pry information out of my mouth. At worst, I'll just die." At the side, Meow Meow smiled and said, "Little sister, do you think that the most terrifying thing in this world is death? Then you're wrong. In this world, there are countless things that are even more terrifying than death. For example, living a life worse than death. Ji Dong, do you want me to do it?" As the Alliance Master of the Demonic Alliance, what kind of environment had she lived in since she was young? Ji Dong shook his head and said, "This little girl shouldn't be our enemy. There's no rush. She will naturally speak later." The girl said angrily, "You're the little girl. How am I little?" As she spoke, she deliberately puffed out her full chest. However, when her gaze fell on the girls in front of her, she immediately deflated like a balloon. Even Du Xner, who had the slimmest figure, was much bigger than her, not to mention Chen Sichuan, who had a perfect figure, and Jin, who had an extremely hot figure. Ji Dong ignored her and stood up. With a stretch of his right hand, he had already pulled the black-clothed man who had been thrown onto the ground over. He sealed the black-clothed man with his magic power, causing the black-clothed man to be unable to move at all. Ji Dong's current position was just enough for the girl to see what he was doing. He didn't directly ask the black-clothed man. Under the other party's terrified gaze, Ji Dong's black eyes gradually turned silver. The dazzling silver light immediately attracted the girl's attention. She looked at Ji Dong in shock, not knowing what he was doing. Immediately after, she saw two rays of silver light shoot out from Ji Dong's eyes, right into the black-clothed man's eyes. Immediately, the black-clothed man's body began to tremble violently like a sieve. His eyes rolled up, and his entire body twitched continuously. His mouth was wide open, and he let out a whimper. His painful appearance caused the girl to involuntarily shiver. Thinking back to the killing methods Ji Dong and the others had used previously, her face immediately turned somewhat pale. The silver light disappeared, and the black-clothed man was still standing there. However, there was no longer any emotion in his eyes. Instead, he was at a loss as he stared blankly at Ji Dong. His body was still twitching intermittently, giving off the feeling that he was a walking corpse. "Tell me where you came from. What's going on with the Dark Sacrificial Group?" Ji Dong asked coldly. The black-clothed man replied mechanically, "We come from the Darkness Temple. The Dark Sacrificial Group is a sacrificial group directly under Lord Tianji. We are the lowest members of the Dark Sacrificial Group and are generally responsible for conveying some orders from the higher-ups to the high priests of various places. Therefore, we have a transcendent status wherever we go. Even the Devil Masters, who are far more powerful than us, have to listen to our orders respectfully when they see us. Otherwise, they will be disloyal to Lord Tianji and will be punished severely." Ji Dong thought for a moment, then continued to ask, "In that case, the Devil Masters on the continent are under the command of the High Priests?" The black-clothed man replied, "Yes, Lord Tianji divided the Devil Masters into dark sacrificial groups according to the number and rank of the Devil Masters. Only an army composed of Devil Masters can have such a title. Each dark sacrificial group is composed of 100 Devil Masters, commanded by a high priest from the Darkness Temple. Every 10 dark sacrificial group is commanded by a high priest in a red robe. This is a dark legion. Every 10 dark legions is commanded by a high priest in a purple robe. This is a dark legion. Jidong nodded with satisfaction. The dark sacrificial group came at the right time. This information was what they needed the most right now. Tell me about the ranks of the dark sacrificial group and the number of each rank. Jidong asked. The dark sacrificial group replied, under Lord Tianji, the noblest are the 10 saints, also known as dark celestial saints. They're the most loyal subordinates of Lord Tianji. Each of them has a dark artifact. Under them are 20 high priests. 5 of them command the 5 dark devil armies. The other 5 high priests command the armies of the 5 empires. The remaining 10 high priests stay in the darkness temple without any special circumstances. Under the high priests are the red robe high priests. There are about 1,000 of them. They are the middle-level commanders. Below them are the high priests. They are the middle-level commanders. I don't know how many of them there are. In any case, they're the backbone of the army and the devil army. Dark sacrificial group, like us, can only pass orders to the high priests. The higher-level red robe high priests and purple robe high priests are passed on by the dark sacrificial group. Hearing up to here, Jidong and the others had a basic understanding of the strength of He Tianji subordinates. Everyone's complexion couldn't help but become a little ugly. What did the 5 devil armies mean? That was 50,000 devil masters. In other words, there were 50,000 devil masters under He Tianji subordinates. The number of devil masters in the 5 elements continent might not even be a third of the total number of devil masters. And this was under the premise that those devil masters with less than 4 crowns were taken into account. Was the cultivation of the purple robe high priests and red robe high priests? This time, the dark priest's answer was very simple, but it also shocked the heavenly stem saints even more, 9 crown and 8 crown. Jidong and dark celestial saints glanced at each other. In other words, 20 purple robe high priests were 20 supremes. If they didn't take into account those idiotically rich merchants, just this point alone made the darkness 5 elements continent twice as strong as the radiance 5 elements continent. What was more frightening was the number of red robe high priests. 1,000 red robe high priests meant 1,008 crown experts. This was not a joke. It should be known that the average strength of the heavenly stem saints was only 8 crown experts. Even if they weren't equivalent to ordinary 8 crown devil masters who could cultivate to 8 crown were already top experts. Moreover, these devil masters under dark celestial saints were different from the devil masters in the radiance 5 elements continent. These dark devil masters obeyed dark celestial saints' orders. They were well organized and could become the most direct fighting force at any time. What kind of concept would it be to have 5 devil armies appear on the battlefield? Dark celestial saints were extravagant. The whole darkness 5 elements continent had been supporting these forces with all the resources of the country. It was indeed unimaginably powerful. The more they understood, the greater the gap between the two sides. Jidong had already asked for all the information he wanted. He asked a few more questions about the details until the dark priest had nothing else useful to say. Only then did Jidong casually slap him on the forehead and send him to heaven. At the same time, he took out a darkness crystal crown. Tianji took a deep breath and bitterly smiled. 50,000 demon masters. This is a terrifying number. With so many demon masters joining hands to activate a demon skill, I'm afraid 50,000? That's just the regular number. It doesn't include those below 4 crowns. There's still over 100,000 demon masters below 4 crowns. The girl sitting on the chair suddenly interrupted. Hearing her words, even Jidong couldn't help but be stunned. Not counting the 50,000 demon masters below 4 crowns? What kind of concept was that? There were also over 100,000 low-level demon masters, which was the reserve strength of the demon masters. If calculated like this, the total number of demon masters in the 5 elements darkness continent was almost 10 times that of the 5 elements light continent. It had to be known that the 5 elements darkness continent was a third smaller than the 5 elements light continent. Tianji sighed and said, 80,000 years of accumulation. This is the true accumulation of the 5 elements darkness continent. No wonder Tianji was so confident. Jidong gave Tianji a look, indicating that he should stop talking. The overall strength of the 5 elements darkness continent was indeed beyond imagination, but it wasn't like they didn't have any advantages. For example, the 10 of them were currently deep inside the 5 elements darkness continent. This in itself was a huge advantage. Turning to the girl sitting on the chair, Jidong still had a faint smile on his face. However, in the eyes of the girl, his smile was no different from the smile of the devil. You saw the situation just now. I think now we can have a good talk. If you're not willing to talk, I don't mind using the power of my soul to turn you into an idiot and read the contents of your brain. Of course, I know that you're not a subordinate of Tianji, so I won't kill you. As for what will happen after you turn into an idiot, that's not something I can know. Think about it. If such a beautiful girl turns into an idiot and walks out, what will it cause? Miao Miao leaned on Chen Sichuan's shoulder and whispered to her, "When did Jidong become so evil?" Chen Sichuan glanced at her and said, "This isn't evil, it's just a scare." Miao Miao curled her lips and said, "You only know how to speak for him." Chen Sichuan smiled and said, "Doesn't side with their man. Don't worry, Fury will be fine. After all, he's the son of Tianji. Even a tiger, even though it's cruel, won't eat its cubs. Moreover, I believe that he'll be able to conceal his intentions very well." Miao Miao sighed and said, "This bastard, I just want to beat him up now." As they talked in low voices, on the other side, the girl was indeed frightened by Jidong. It was just as Jidong had said, if such a beautiful girl like her turned into an idiot and walked out on the street, even an idiot would know what would happen. Moreover, who would want to turn into an idiot? What Jidong had done just now was to intimidate her. She was only 15 or 16 years old. No matter how determined she would still have her own thoughts. At this moment, her eyes had become very complicated, as if she was struggling with something in her heart. Jidong said to her, "If I'm not wrong, you should be an opponent of Tianji, not a supporter. The eyes are the windows to a person's soul. Previously, when those dark worshippers were acting violently, although you tried your best to conceal it, I could still see the deep hatred in your eyes. If I'm right, then we aren't enemies, but friends. In the future, we might even be comrades who can fight side by side, because Tianji is also our enemy." The purple-haired girl stared at Jidong. Her heart was clearly struggling. Jidong's words were indeed very persuasive. However, what surprised Jidong and the Heavenly Stem holy disciples was that the purple-haired girl calmed down in an extremely short period of time. There was no longer any sneer on her face. She said in a low voice, "You can turn me into an idiot, but even if you turn me into an idiot, I don't believe that you can get anything out of me." What a fearless girl. One must know that she was only 15 or 16 years old. Chapter 583. A young lady who was unafraid of death. How pious and stubborn did she have to be able to do this? The Heavenly Stem holy disciples couldn't help but reveal a hint of joy. Jidong nodded to the young lady and said, "All right, you can go now." The purple-haired girl thought that she had misheard. The ruthless methods of Jidong's group had left a deep impression on her. She couldn't believe that Jidong would let her go so easily. She couldn't help but stare at him in a daze. Jidong said, "What? Do you want me to send you out? You can leave now. Since you aren't willing to say anything, and I know that you aren't an enemy, how could I really hurt you?" The purple-haired girl stared at Jidong, wanting to see something from his expression. Unfortunately, she was facing the Heavenly Stem holy disciples. If she could see anything, then Jidong wouldn't be able to survive. The purple-haired girl's beautiful eyes rolled around a few times. She stood up, but she didn't leave. Instead, she directly jumped onto Jidong's bed and laid down. She placed her hands behind her head and said, "You captured me, and now you want me to leave? I'm sticking to you. I won't be fooled. I'm not leaving." Jidong looked at her with a hint of amusement and said, "You won't leave?" The purple-haired girl proudly said, "Of course I won't leave. You have already captured me. If I don't go back, then my people will know that something happened to me and will definitely respond. You are all so powerful. If I go back now, wouldn't that give you a chance to follow me?" You want to use this little trick on me? You're looking down on me too much. Ji Dong looked at his companions and couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. If he wasn't almost certain that this girl in front of him was not an enemy, he really wanted to hand her over to Meow Meow. This little girl was too difficult to deal with. What she said was exactly what Ji Dong was thinking. There was no need for anyone to follow her. Even if she left the city, Ji Dong's powerful soul power could easily follow her, and she wouldn't find out. Even a 9-crown devil master wouldn't be able to find out. He didn't expect that this teenage girl would see through him. Ji Dong couldn't help but feel a sense of defeat. He didn't know who could raise such a clever and principled girl. Ajin walked to Ji Dong's side. She raised her palm like a knife and gestured at her neck. There was no need to ask. Everyone knew what she meant. This was the Dark Five Elements continent. Their whereabouts must not be leaked. Killing this girl was clearly the best way to get rid of the problem. The purple-haired girl was not afraid of Ji Dong at all. But when she saw Ajin walk over and felt the bone-chilling coldness from Ajin, she couldn't help but shiver. She thought to herself, Am I going to die? However, she immediately breathed a sigh of relief because she saw Ji Dong shake his head. She won't leave. We will leave. Everything will be the same. We will leave tonight. Before we leave, we will erase her memory. Everyone nodded. Indeed, they all had a good impression of this girl and didn't want to kill her just like that. Lang Tianyi dragged the corpse of the Dark Priestess out to deal with it. With a wave of his hand, Ji Dong sealed the purple-haired girl's hearing so that she couldn't hear his conversation with his companions. Ajin, distribute the darkness crystal crowns you just obtained to everyone according to their attributes. Although the level of these darkness crystal crowns is a little low, absorbing them will be of some use. Absorb darkness crystal crowns. The Heavenly Stem holy disciples all looked at Ji Dong in surprise. Yao Qianshu was quick-witted and was the first to react. He said, I understand now. No wonder you brought us into the Five Elements Dark Continent a year and a half earlier, instead of staying in the Dragon Valley to train for a period of time. So it was because of this. The Dark Crystal Crown is extremely precious on our side and is rarely seen, but it's different here. As long as we kill dark magicians, we can obtain it. Absorbing a Dark Crystal Crown of the same attribute will help our cultivation increase twice the results with half the effort. It'll be much faster than training on our own. Haha, this is really a good idea. This is the true meaning of using battle to nurture battle. As long as we have enough time, who knows, we might all be able to cultivate to the saint level. Ji Dong said with a smile. I first gained magic power because I absorbed the 2 lowest level dark crystal crowns. Actually, it's not that easy. Everyone's cultivation is already very high. Although absorbing the dark crystal crowns is effective, it won't be that great unless we absorb the higher level ones, such as the red-robed high priest or the purple-robed high priest. There's still a huge gap between our overall strength and that of the dark divination and the dark stem saints. If we want to catch up, we have to use this method. It's impossible for the dark stem saints to do that. At the same time, this is also an important reason why I set my target on the dark magicians. All right, everyone, go back to your rooms and cultivate. Although we can improve our cultivation by absorbing the dark crystal crowns, we can't neglect our own cultivation. If it wasn't for the fact that everyone already has a solid foundation, I wouldn't have chosen this method to help you improve. After all, the power from the outside world isn't as solid as our own cultivation. Therefore, while absorbing the dark crystal crowns, everyone still needs to cultivate diligently and make this external power your own. Everyone agreed. Except for Chun Sichuan, everyone else went back to their rooms. It wasn't that Chun Sichuan didn't trust Ji Dong and was afraid that he would do something to the purple-haired girl alone in the room. It was because there were no Ewood crystal crowns among the crystal crowns, but there were 2 water crystal crowns. In fact, with the cultivation of the heavenly stem saints, there was no need for them to go back to their rooms to absorb these crystal crowns. It was just a normal crystal crown of darkness, and they could absorb it in an instant. They just didn't want the purple-haired girl to see it. Ji Dong didn't knock the purple-haired girl out because he still had some hope. After coming to the Five Elements continent, their biggest problem was that they were unfamiliar with this world. If they could find the power to oppose the dark heavenly secrets, it would undoubtedly make all their actions a lot easier. However, Ji-dong didn't think there was much hope. The purple-haired girl was too cunning. It was not easy to lure her. Although the little girl's cultivation was not weak, her soul cultivation was stronger than a 5-crown devil master. Ji-dong was very clear that if he really forcibly read her memory, then it was very likely that the girl would destroy her own soul first. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been so determined before. Moreover, in that case, they would completely lose the opportunity to contact this nameless organization. Just as Ji-dong was thinking about how to pry open the purple-haired girl's mouth, he suddenly heard the purple-haired girl say, "Release my hearing, I believe you." Ji-dong and Chun Sichuan couldn't help but be surprised. Just a moment ago, this little girl was so insistent and was not even afraid of death or becoming an idiot. Why would she suddenly compromise? Casually releasing the restriction on her hearing, Ji-dong asked doubtfully, "You believe us?" The purple-haired girl firmly nodded and said, "However, I have a condition. As long as you are willing to do it once for me, I will believe you." Do it once for her to see? Ji-dong's reaction in this aspect was still a bit slow, but Chen Sichuan's pretty face instantly turned red. She scolded, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Ji-dong also came to his senses. With an embarrassed expression, he said angrily, "Are you messing with me?" The purple-haired girl looked at the two of them dumbfoundedly and said coquettishly, "Heavens, what kind of dirty thoughts are in your heads? I'm not asking you to do that kind of thing. I'm asking you to absorb a darkness crystal crown in front of me for me to see." Hearing her words, Ji-dong first felt relieved, but then he immediately felt a chill in his heart. His eyes shone brightly, and a powerful pressure suppressed the purple-haired girl to the point that she couldn't even sit properly. She was directly pressed down on the bed. A cold light shone in Ji-dong's eyes, and a strong killing intent instantly burst forth. He said, "Speak. How do you know that we can absorb darkness crystal crowns?" As he spoke, he had already raised his right hand. As long as this girl played any more tricks, he would definitely immediately kill her. Revealing his whereabouts was a great taboo, let alone revealing his identity. No matter how good his impression of this girl was, once everyone's safety was threatened, the tyrant would definitely not show mercy. The purple-haired girl groaned a few times. Only then did Ji-dong realize that the pressure he had released was too strong, and she couldn't speak at all. Only then did he relax a bit, and with a wave of his right hand, the purple-haired girl sat up again. At this moment, the purple-haired girl's heart was also filled with shock. She knew that Ji-dong was very powerful, but she didn't expect him to be so powerful. With just a glance, the surrounding air seemed to solidify, instantly compressing her body. She didn't doubt that if Ji-dong wanted to, just the air alone could tear her to pieces. "I know how to read lips. Although you sealed my hearing just now, I can still see everything you said." This time, the purple-haired girl didn't try to play any tricks and spoke honestly. Lip reading. Both Ji-dong and Chun Sichuan couldn't help but not know whether to laugh or cry. They never would have thought that the flaw would be in this aspect. The world was big, and there were indeed all sorts of strange things. Such a young girl actually knew how to read lips. The purple-haired girl stared at Ji-dong, and a pair of beautiful eyes sparkled. She said, "As long as you can absorb darkness crystal crowns, then it proves that you are from another continent. Naturally, you are our friend and not our enemy." Although she wasn't very old, she was extremely intelligent, and who knew how many times more mature than her peers. At this moment, she was also very nervous. She knew that since she had said all this, then if the other party didn't approve of her identity, it would bring about a disaster. She was only 15 this year. How could a young girl in the prime of her youth want to die? However, at this time, she had no other choice. Looking at Ji-dong, her delicate little hands were already clenched tightly. The pressure suddenly lightened, and Ji-dong's expression returned to normal. With a flick of his wrist, the 5-crown fire crystal crown that he had obtained from the black-clothed man appeared in his palm. Then, a bright blue flame ignited in Ji-dong's palm. The 5-crown fire crystal crown melted almost instantly, turning into a liquid that seeped into Ji Dong's palm. The current Ji Dong wasn't the same as when he absorbed the Class 1 Darkness Crystal Crown. He directly refined the 5-crown Fire Crystal Crown and absorbed it into his body to avoid any waste. This 5-crown Fire Crystal Crown wouldn't have much of an effect on his level 88 mana. At most, it would fill up his mana a little, but it would still save him an hour of cultivation. Through this absorption, Ji Dong made some rough calculations. If he wanted to go from level 88 to level 89, then he would have to absorb at least 108-crown Fire Crystal Crowns, or 49-crown Fire Crystal Crowns. As for the barrier from level 89 to level 90, it would probably take even more. Even so, the feeling of absorbing Darkness Crystal Crowns to increase mana was still pretty good. Ji Dong already felt like he was sharpening his blade. He definitely wouldn't show any mercy to dark mages. They were all lackeys of dark fate. If he wanted the 5 Elements continent, or even the 5 Elements continent, to be a little more peaceful, these dark mages, especially those at the priest level, would be better off dead. The purple-haired girl watched Ji Dong do all this with wide eyes. She blinked as if she suddenly thought of something and said, "Also, I've heard that your yin-yang crown should be different from ours. I still have to take a look." Ji Dong had already seen how weird this little girl was, so he didn't hide anything. Mana surged slightly, and a black and white yin-yang crown condensed above his head. However, he used the divine yin-yang lock technique, so he only displayed 6 crowns and 3 stars at level 66, and not his own level 88. Among the Heavenly Stem holy disciples, he was the only one who could do this. The others could only use some low-level skills at most without releasing the yin-yang crown. Seeing that strange black and white yin-yang crown, the purple-haired girl was truly shocked this time. She rubbed her eyes hard, as if trying to make herself see it more clearly. Golden edges, that's right, it really is golden edges. But why is his yin-yang crown black and white? How could Ji Dong not see the doubts in the purple-haired girl's heart? He raised his hands at the same time, and red and blue yin-yang flames quietly rose from his palms. Chapter 584. My mana is a bit special. Innately, yin and yang are in balance. That's why yin and yang flames can coexist. This is also my greatest secret. You should know that I came from the 5 Elements continent. After seeing my secret, you had no other choice. Ji Dong's palms slowly rose. His voice also became incomparably calm. However, the purple-haired girl knew that Ji Dong's current state was the most terrifying. "All right, I believe you. My name is Mo. The purple-haired girl put on a scared expression and giggled. She jumped down from the bed and looked at Ji Dong from head to toe. However, she still didn't look at Qin Xuan. She said, "You guessed right. I do come from an organization that fights against dark divination. However, I'm very curious as to how you came to our side. You should know that the Holy Evil Island is blocked by the Red Lotus heavenly flames. Even dark divination can't do anything." Ji Dong retracted the yin-yang crown and the flames on his hands. He indifferently said, "It seems like you know a lot of things. However, now is not the time for you to ask me. I've already shown my sincerity. I need to know what kind of organization you are and what kind of strength you have. You should be able to guess that we didn't come to the 5 Elements continent to sightsee." Mo nodded and said, "Our organization has been around for 500 years and is very powerful. You don't have to worry. Working with us is definitely a wise choice. If you're willing, I can take you to see my father. However, you can only go alone. Do you dare?" Ji Dong didn't hesitate and said, "All right, do you want to go now?" Mo didn't expect Ji Dong to agree so quickly. She looked at him in surprise and said, "Aren't you afraid that I'll sell you out?" Ji Dong's reply made Mo a little depressed. She simply and directly said no. Mo pouted and looked at Ji Dong up and down. She said, "Then let's go." Then she walked outside. Qin Xuan didn't stop Ji Dong. The two exchanged glances. Then Ji Dong followed Mo out. By the time Ji Dong left, Mo's disguise had already been done. She returned to her original appearance as a waitress and walked out of the hotel. Ji Dong followed Mo out. Qin Xuan watched them disappear at the entrance of the hotel before returning to her room. She smiled and shook her head. She thought to herself, although this little girl is cunning, she still ran into an iron plate when she met Ji-dong. How could she be worried about Ji-dong's safety? In a one-on-one situation, with Ji-dong's current strength, even without the help of the sacred evolution fire dragon and the eclipse phoenix, he could fight the dragon monarch evenly. That was the combined strength of a Saint-tier expert. No matter what happened, Ji-dong would be able to adapt to it. Just as Ji-dong and the others left, the Heavenly Stem holy disciples walked out of their rooms. Tianji smiled and said, "It looks like we'll have to delay our operation. I hope that Ji-dong will bring back good news." Du Ming smiled and said, "I can't wait to go to the Darkness Divine Temple and absorb the Darkness Crystal Crown." That's a good idea. He had just absorbed 2 4-crown crystal crowns. As he hadn't broken through to 8-crown crystal crowns, he felt that it was much more obvious than the others. This kind of plundering cultivation method didn't require any psychological burden. It wasn't just him, the Heavenly Stem holy disciples all liked it. After exiting the hotel, Emo directly turned left, walking in front of Ji-dong like a servant leading the way. This weird little girl was now acting like a yes man. Even Ji-dong couldn't help but sigh in amazement at her concealment skills. She was only 15 years old. Even though he had lived 2 lives, when he came to the Radiant 5 Elements continent, he only knew how to cultivate at the age of 15. But this little girl was even more cunning than an adult. She was just as shrewd as the secret agents in his previous life. Emo led Ji-dong around the city. After walking for a full hour, she still didn't reveal her destination. From time to time, she would vigilantly observe her surroundings. She could keenly sense even the slightest movement. Ji-dong followed behind her, not in a hurry. He just silently observed everything she did. During this hour, he didn't rush her even once. Finally, when they arrived at a house, Emo carefully observed the surroundings. Then she flashed in and waved at Ji-dong. Ji-dong followed behind her, slightly restraining his soul power. He didn't probe the surroundings too much. Just like how Chan Sichuan was confident in him, he also had absolute confidence in himself. This residence did not look any different from the other residences around it. Walking into it, it was a very ordinary small courtyard, about 30 square meters in size. There was a well in the courtyard, and an old man in his 50s was drawing water from the well. He looked exactly like a farmer, and his face was sallow and emaciated. Ji-dong's gaze lingered on him for a moment, and he could feel that this middle-aged man in his 50s did not have any magical power and was just an ordinary person. Emo walked in front of the middle-aged man and said, "Uncle, there's a guest." The middle-aged man raised his head and glanced at Ji-dong. He was slightly startled, and then he saw Emo winking at him. He immediately nodded and said, "Since there's a guest, bring him in." Emo turned her head. Hyoheim waved her hand, indicating for Ji-dong to come in front of her. Ji-dong walked over. Emo pointed at the well next to her, and then her right hand pressed on the edge of the well. She nimbly jumped in first. Ji-dong nodded to the middle-aged man and followed behind Emo. The mouth of the well wasn't big, and it could only fit one person at a time. They also had to avoid the well rope. By the time Ji-dong jumped in, Emo had already disappeared. But how could she escape Ji-dong's soul tracking? After falling for about 10 meters, Ji-dong's figure flashed, and he entered a hole in the side of the well. As soon as he entered, Ji-dong heard a sizzling sound behind him. The hole had already closed, and all he could see was darkness. Stepping on solid ground, Ji-dong noticed that the air was a little thin and turbid, but this was not a problem for him. He did not light a fire to illuminate the path for himself. Instead, he walked confidently in the darkness. Emo's voice came from the front. "You're quite bold. You didn't hesitate at all to follow me." Ji-dong smiled slightly. "I'm just a kitten. What's there to be afraid of?" Emo angrily said. "Who are you calling a kitten?" Ji-dong said, "Of course it's you." "Oh no, it should be the little fox. A sly little fox." Emo seemed to admit that she couldn't win against Ji-dong in a verbal argument. She snorted and continued forward. The passage from the well to the well was twisted and crooked. Not only was the air turbid, but the terrain inside was also extremely complex. There were many forks in the road, making it look like a maze. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, Emor stopped. Then, Jidong heard a light knocking sound. The knocking sound was very rhythmic, sometimes long and sometimes short. After nearly 100 knocks, Emor stopped. Then, a series of creaking sounds rang out. A bright light illuminated the passage, and Emor jumped out. At this time, two bursts of mana simultaneously came from both sides of Jidong's body. Dense mana instantly spread throughout the passage. Jidong stepped on nothing. The dense mana from both sides forcefully pressed against his body, as if trying to force him into the hole beneath him. At the same time, the exit that Emor had just come out of quickly closed. Jidong coldly snorted. His body didn't move, or rather, he floated in place. He stretched out both hands at the same time, and the two bursts of earth mana didn't even cause a ripple on his body. On the other hand, the god of destruction that he had released caused the stone walls to respond. Through Soul Probe, Jidong knew that there were mechanisms on both sides of the wall. Just now, they had suddenly activated, and each of them had reached out with a palm, wanting to push him into the hole below. At this time, Jidong, who had been deliberately suppressing his own soul power, immediately responded like a tyrant. He fully released his Saint-tier soul power, and his huge soul power increased exponentially. The previous residents, as well as everything in this underground passage, were all enveloped by his soul power in an instant. What Jidong wanted to do was very simple. He used his powerful soul power to cover the entire place. As long as it was a living creature, no one would be able to escape his soul monitoring. If the situation went wrong, he would definitely not hesitate to start a massacre. Just like he had said to Mo earlier, after knowing their history, they would either be friends or dead people. There was no second choice. Taking a step forward, Jidong was already standing on the ground at the edge of the trap. At the same time, he punched out, and a glaring red light instantly lit up the entire passage. The sun-fire mana condensed into a tyrannical fireball and heavily bombarded the entrance of the passage that had just been closed. Amidst the loud explosion, the intense explosion caused the entire underground world to tremble slightly. However, the material of the underground world was rather hard. Jidong's casual punch did not blast open the exit of the tunnel, but only left behind a huge hole that was 1 meter deep. "Please stop. Welcome, guests from afar." At this time, a gentle male voice came from all directions. However, it seemed as if Jidong did not hear it. His figure flashed, and he was already at the hole. His right hand pressed on the stone wall, and the stone wall clearly lit up. In the next moment, an even more violent bang was heard, but none of the flying gravel landed on Jidong. The stone wall that was 2 meters deep was forcibly blasted open by Jidong's celestial strike. The bright light from before shone into the passage again. "What a joke. You just schemed against me. Do you think I'll stop just because you want me to? Then, I'm not a tyrant." Jidong snorted coldly in his heart. He took a step forward and was already out of the passage. This was a wide, brightly lit space. It was hundreds of square meters wide. Dozens of pairs of eyes instantly fell on Jidong. Emor was right in front of him. At this time, her disguise had been removed. She was nestled in the arms of a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s. She looked at the gravel in front of her with a shocked expression. Dozens of people's gazes were focused on him, but it did not make Jidong uncomfortable at all. He could clearly feel the hostility of the people around him. But so what? The middle-aged man that Emor was nestled and smiled and said, "It seems that you are an unwelcome guest." Jidong said calmly, "How you evaluate me is up to you. So what if I am an unwelcome guest? I can understand your cautiousness, but if you want to harm me, then you are looking at the wrong person." There was a limit to a person's patience. Moreover, Jidong was a tyrant. He was not someone who was good at patience. It would be good to have the support of the organization that was fighting against the dark side of Heaven's secrets. But if he didn't, then there would be no one left alive. Emor clearly had a lot of resentment towards Jidong. She had finally returned to her home ground. She said fiercely, "Dad, hurry up and catch this bad guy." No matter where he comes from, beat him up first. Just now, he squeezed my neck so hard it hurt. He wanted to kill me more than once. There was no need for the middle-aged man to speak. In a flash, there were already 4 middle-aged men surrounding Jidong. They released their yin-yang crowns at the same time. They had different attributes, but they were all 6 crowns devil masters. Suddenly, the underground space was filled with a strong devil force. Jidong did not try to explain anything. He put his hands behind his back and raised his head slightly. He did not even look at the 4 people surrounding him. Although he did not show any disdain, the arrogance that came from his bones was enough to make people go crazy. With a roar, the 4 people moved at almost the same time. Their attacks were very unique. Among the 4, 2 of them rushed at Jidong at the same time, while the other 2 poured their devil force into the 2 who rushed at them. They used the principle of devil force to strengthen them. Obviously, these people did not intend to kill Jidong, but to capture him. The 2 6 Crowns Devil Masters attacked with the help of the other 2 6 Crowns Devil Masters. Their strength was quite impressive. Unfortunately, they had met an opponent that they could not touch today. Jidong did not even take his hands out from behind his back, nor did he need to release the yin-yang crown. He took a small step to the right and raised his right leg, kicking towards the Devil Master coming at him from the right. This small step was not to be underestimated. It was a simple movement, but it had already caused the attacks of the 2 Devil Masters, which should have arrived at the same time, to have a sequence. There were no flashy moves. It was completely clear to the opponent how he attacked. He did not even use a bit of devil force, relying purely on his physical strength. With a bang, the Devil Master on the right was kicked away by Jidong. He flew like a cannonball towards the Devil Master who was helping him. Chapter 585. Jidong sent a Demon Master who was attacking him flying with a kick. At the same time, he turned his body halfway, and with a simple roundhouse kick, he kicked another Demon Master. The result was exactly the same. The 2 Amplification Demon Masters didn't even have a chance to dodge before they were sent flying by their companions. The 4 Demon Masters slammed into the walls on both sides of the hall, making muffled sounds. They didn't die, but none of them could get up. The middle-aged man, who had been watching the battle with a very natural expression, was suddenly greatly alarmed. He gently pushed his daughter away, and his expression became extremely grave. He had seen Jidong's movements very clearly, and although they weren't very fast, they were unstoppable. The 2 magicians who had attacked Jidong had clearly reacted accordingly, and they had even used all of their mana to attack. Even so, Jidong's domineering and unreasonable kicks had still sent them flying. Their mana bombarded Jidong's feet, but it had no effect at all. Relying solely on the strength of their bodies, the 4 6 Crowns magicians had already been heavily injured and fell to the ground. The middle-aged man looked at Embark with a sharp gaze. Embark said, "His mana is really only level 66. I saw it clearly. And Dad, how old is he? Level 66 is already an exaggeration." Although that was what she said, even she felt that it was not very convincing. How could a level 66 Devil Master be able to defeat 4 6 Crown Devil Masters with just 2 kicks? For a moment, the atmosphere in the underground hall became heavy. The other Demon Masters slowly stepped forward and released their yin-yang crowns. The middle-aged man in the lead looked at Jidong with a serious expression. He knew that his daughter's wrong judgment could bring disaster to the organization. Jidong said coldly, "If you want to fight, I don't mind beating you all down first before talking to you." The expression on the middle-aged man's face changed, but it didn't take long for his expression to return to normal. He waved his hands to the sides, signaling the people around him to step back. He then bowed to Jidong and said, "I'm sorry, guest from afar. I apologize for everything that happened just now. I think we can have a good talk." "Dad," Embark called out unhappily. The middle-aged man said angrily, "Shut up, take her away." Immediately, 2 female demon masters came forward and dragged the unwilling Embark away. The middle-aged man smiled bitterly at Hyoheim and said, "This girl's mother died when she was young, so she was spoiled by me. I hope you don't mind. My name is Shan Lei, and I'm in charge of this place. May I know your name?" Looking at the elegant middle-aged man in front of him, Ji-dong said calmly, "This little girl is far more cunning than her peers. Even I was almost fooled by her. She's already very outstanding. Your Excellency doesn't need to be modest. I only came here with her for one reason, because we have a common enemy." The middle-aged man nodded and said, "I just heard from Mo that you came from the Radiant's Five Elements continent. Since you came from there, you should know what kind of position Dark Tianji occupies in our Five Elements continent. Our organization has been established for 500 years, which seems to be a great achievement, but in fact, only we know that it's precisely because Dark Tianji disdains to deal with us that we can always exist, but we can only live underground forever. We are just a group of demon masters and civilians who refuse to submit to Dark Tianji's tyrannical rule. You can ask us to rebel against Tianji, but if you need our help, I'm afraid I can't do it because I can't bring the danger of the organization's destruction. To be frank, I'm not optimistic about you. As far as I know, the strength of your Radiance continent is far from being comparable to Dark Tianji's Dark Temple. In a little more than a year, the Dark Temple will launch an all-out attack on your Radiance continent. I'm afraid that at that time, it will be your doomsday." Although the attitude of the middle-aged man, Lightning Thunder, had calmed down, but his words could be said to be sharp. Not only did he refuse Ji-dong, but he also clearly told Ji-dong that he was very clear about the bad situation of your Radiance Five Elements continent. If you want to get our help and support, it won't be that easy. Ji-dong coldly said, "I don't like to beat around the bush. What you mean is that we don't have enough strength to fight against Dark Tianji, and that we will only drag you down, right?" Lightning Thunder and Ji-dong looked at each other. He didn't know why, but this young man in front of him always gave him a very dangerous feeling. It wasn't just because of the tyrannical strength that Ji-dong had shown before, but also because of the arrogance that came from his bones. Lightning Thunder said, "Yes, that's right." Ji-dong nodded and said, "I just want to know under what circumstances can I get your help." Lightning Thunder said in a low voice, "Unless you can show that you have the strength to defeat Dark Tianji." Ji-dong shook his head and said, "I can't do that. Dark Tianji is currently at the peak of the Saint Realm. Whether it is in your five-element continent or my five elements continent, in a one-on-one situation, no one is a match for him. What I need is not for you to cooperate with us in battle. I only need you to provide me with the information I need." Lightning Thunder's eyebrows slightly rose, and a thoughtful light appeared in his eyes. After a long time, he said, "You must prove that you have enough strength for us to support you. How many people did you bring this time?" Ji-dong said, 10. "Only 10? Lightning Thunder's eyes clearly showed a trace of disappointment, but his disappointment was quickly replaced by shock. Ji-dong raised his hands. Black and gold, two colored flames simultaneously rose from his palms. This time, he didn't hide anything. 8 crowns, level 88, black and white. Yin-yang crown brazenly appeared above his head with a golden edge that belonged exclusively to light. My magic power isn't enough for 9 crowns, but my ultimate dual flames should be enough to prove something to you. Soldiers are valued for quality, not quantity. Don't tell me you don't understand this principle. Light Tianji against saints?" Lightning Thunder sucked in a breath of cold air. The way he looked at Ji-dong had already completely changed. He said in shock, "You've got guts. As Saints of Light, you actually dare to come to our five elements dark continent. Aren't you afraid that you'll be destroyed here, leaving your Radiance continent without the last bit of resistance?" Ji-dong said indifferently, "I admit that in terms of overall strength, our five elements dark continent is far behind, but since I can appear here, it proves that we also have our own advantages. I can tell you frankly that Dark Tianji is still leading his dark heavenly stem saints to the holy evil island, trying to intercept us. But we've already come in, and they still don't know. Tell me first, is the entire five elements dark continent like this city in front of me? Has it been squeezed by Dark Tianji and his dark temple to the point where ordinary people can no longer survive?" A trace of pain flashed in Lightning Thunder's eyes. He nodded silently and said, If it wasn't for the Dark Temple that has plunged the continent into misery and suffering to the point where even basic life can't be maintained, how could there be our resistance organization? Our five elements dark continent has no country, only the Dark Temple. The oppressive rule of Dark Tianji and the strength in his hands that no one can contend with are constantly corrupting the entire continent. If he can lead the Dark Army to occupy your Radiance continent, perhaps it can be eased. If he can't, then, in less than 100 years, I'm afraid. At this point, the trace of pain in his eyes could no longer be concealed. The others around him also lowered their heads silently. Lightning Thunder took a deep breath, calmed his emotions as much as possible, and said, according to the statistics of our organization, 300 years ago, the number of civilians dying of hunger and exhaustion every year was about 300,000. Today, 300 years later, the number has increased tenfold, reaching as high as 3 million. Moreover, this number is still increasing. Dark Tianji's extravagant use of military power has made the whole continent miserable. Shanlei took a deep breath and did his best to calm his emotions. According to our organization statistics, 300 years ago, the number of commoners who died of starvation or exhaustion every year was around 300,000. Today, however, 300 years later, this number has increased tenfold, reaching 3 million. Moreover, this number is still constantly increasing. The dark side of Tianji's military is extravagant and wasteful, causing the entire continent to be in dire straits. The commoners only dare to be angry, but they do not dare to speak out. In the poorest places, even grass and tree bark have been eaten. It is slightly better in the cities, but there are often cases of people living on a caddy of flour for a month. Although Ji Dong had a certain understanding of the situation, he was even more shocked to hear it from Shan Lei's own mouth. He said, "How do you eat a caddy of flour for a month?" Shan Lei's eyes flickered with pity and pain as he said, "Mix some flour with hot water every day. There are so many crops planted in the fields, but they are all supervised by the military. The amount of food produced is pitifully little. Right now, the commoners of our darkness continent don't even have the strength to resist. It's extremely rare for ordinary people to live past 50 years old. The only hope of every family is to have a magus in their family. Only then would they be able to eat their fill. We are already the last chance of survival for these commoners. Occasionally, we would organize ourselves to snatch some food and distribute it to the commoners. However, the number of people who die of hunger, cold, exhaustion, or torture every year is still increasing." Ji Dong couldn't help but ask, "Is there really no resistance in such a painful life?" Shan Lei smiled in self-mockery and said, "Why not? There are riots almost every year, but all of them die miserably. Darkness Tianji controls such a powerful military force. Who would be able to succeed in a riot? Once a riot occurs, after it is quelled, they will immediately be executed, and the entire family of the participants will be killed. As for those poor families, as long as they have a magus, their lives will immediately become better. They won't care about the lives of others. Those who are able to join our organization are already the last few ambitious people. At the very least, they still have a conscience. As for the Darkness Demon Army under Darkness Tianji, they have long been completely tainted by darkness." At this point, Shan Lei's gaze when looking at Ji Dong became much more sincere. He said, "It's precisely because of this that we have to be cautious and maintain the last bit of resistance for the Darkness Five Elements continent. I hope you can understand. From a certain perspective, we belong to two opposing continents and are enemies. However, what you said is right. We all have a common enemy. If you can prove to us that your arrival in the Darkness Five Elements continent can really affect the entire war situation, we can consider providing you with intelligence." Ji Dong nodded silently and said, "All right, I will prove it to you. Within a month, you will see what you want. However, just like how it's impossible for you to completely trust us, it's also impossible for us to completely trust you. What you said is very right. We belong to different continents, and in essence, our relationship should be that of enemies. We have come to the Darkness Five Elements continent alone. If we want to succeed, safety is the first priority. Since I've come here, then I have to consider the safety of myself and my companions. Shan Lei's expression changed. What do you mean? From the strength that Ji Dong displayed, he understood that although this person in front of him was young, he was not only a holy disciple, but also a holy king of this generation. That was an expert on the same level as the ultimate weapon, Li Yonghao. In this place, there was definitely no one who could stop him. Ji Dong said calmly, "If it's an enemy, then there's only one result. Here, no one will be left alive. However, I hope to be able to cooperate with you guys. In that case, I have two requests. First, give me the address closest to the Darkness Divine Temple. After I complete the proof that you mentioned, it'll be easier for me to contact you guys. I also hope that you can hurry over there as soon as possible. Second, I want to ensure that the news of our appearance is kept secret. Therefore, I want to bring someone with me." Shan Lei's expression changed drastically. The members of the Secrets organization in the surroundings also subconsciously closed in once again. "You want to bring Emoer away?" Everyone was intelligent. From Ji Dong's words, they understood what Ji Dong wanted to do. Ji Dong smiled calmly and said, "Can you people stop me from doing anything? You should understand that this is already the greatest concession I can make. Otherwise, I can make sure that you're the only one left alive, or that all of you will lose your memories." Shan Lei's breathing clearly became hurried. His subordinates were already about to pounce on him, but he raised his hand to stop them. In his heart, he struggled for a full 5 minutes. Then, he suddenly waved his hand and said in a low voice, "Bring Emoer here." "Leader." A few people beside him called out anxiously, wanting to stop him. "I've already said, bring Emoer here." "He's right. This is the best solution. We have to show our sincerity as well. Perhaps this is our last chance. Do you really think that our organization alone is enough to fight against the darkness of heaven's secrets?" Shan Lei was practically roaring as he said this. Ji Dong knew that he was also trying to convince himself. Chapter 586. Not long after, Emoer, who had just left, was brought back. She didn't know what was going on. She looked at her father with an angry expression. Clearly, she was unhappy that her father didn't help her deal with this man who had betrayed her. When Shan Lei saw his daughter, there was a moment of hesitation in his eyes. However, to be able to become an important member of the resistance against Tianji, his mind was very steady. He took a deep breath and said, "Emo, in a moment, you will leave with this mister. In the future, you will have to listen to his orders." "Oh, friend, I still don't know your name." The last sentence was asked by Hyoheim. Ji Dong didn't look at Emoer, who was so shocked that she couldn't close her mouth. He calmly said, "My name is Ji Dong." At this time, Emoer recovered from her shock and said, "Dad, what did you just say?" Shan Lei said in a low voice, "I said, from now on, you will follow Mr. Ji Dong and listen to his orders. Do you understand?" Because of her excitement, Emoer's red lips trembled. "Dad, you don't want Emoer anymore." Shan Lei suppressed his emotions and said softly, "Emoer, listen to me. This is all for the organization. You will follow Mr. Ji Dong and the others. It will also be good for us to verify Mr. Ji Dong's heroic deeds." With a cry, Emoer began to cry. With her intelligence, how could she not see that her father was using her as a hostage to hand over to Ji Dong? "Bad dad, I don't love Emoer anymore." As she cried, she turned and ran. Shan Lei hurriedly chased after her. His gaze turned stern as he said, "Emo, you must go. You are the one who brought Mr. Ji Dong here. This is your responsibility. If you don't go, do you know what the consequences will be?" Emoer's tears fell as she looked at her father. Shan Lei's eyes were filled with heartache as he gently wiped away his daughter's tears. "Emoer, be good. For the sake of the organization, for the sake of everyone, Dad has no choice but to let you go. Mr. Ji Dong and the others came to our darkness continent with a grand goal. If we want him to trust us not to leak his whereabouts, we have to show our sincerity. If not, none of us here will survive. He is a heavenly stem saint of the 5 Elements continent, and he might even be the saint king of this generation's heavenly stem saint. He is an expert on the same level as the ultimate weapon, Li Yonghao. His cultivation base isn't at the 66 level you mentioned. It's at the 88 level. If he wants to, all of us here would be annihilated in the blink of an eye. Not only that, his appearance has brought true hope to our organization. So, no matter what, you have to leave with him. This is the foundation of our cooperation. Dad knows that doing this will make you feel aggrieved, but Dad has no other choice. I believe that Mr. Ji-dong won't do anything to harm you. You will definitely be able to learn many things by staying by his side. After we obtain the verification we need, Dad will bring you back to our side as soon as possible. Okay? It was extremely sensible. She had been by her father's side since young. When she was 15 years old, she was sent to that hotel to do reconnaissance work. She was much more mature than her peers. After a short period of resentment, she gradually calmed down after listening to her father's explanation. Looking at her father's eyes that were filled with reluctance, her heart instantly softened. She had grown up with her father, so she naturally knew that her father would definitely dote on her. The sound of her sobbing suddenly became much softer. She glared fiercely at Ji-dong and then nodded to her father. Only then did Shan Lei let out a huge sigh of relief. He pulled back to their original position and sincerely said to Hyoheim, I sincerely hope that our cooperation can be completed. Mr. Ji-dong, my daughter has been spoiled by me since she was young. Please forgive her. I only have one daughter, so please help me take care of her, Mr. Ji-dong. As he spoke, he bowed deeply to Hyoheim. Seeing the father-daughter pair so affectionate, Ji-dong couldn't bear to see it happen. However, he wasn't just representing himself, but all the heavenly STEM holy disciples. Naturally, he couldn't let his feelings affect the team's interests. He couldn't take the risk. He nodded to Lightning and said, Don't worry. Unless our team is wiped out, we will definitely ensure her safety. Miss Imoer, come with me. As he spoke, Ji-dong had already turned to leave. Imoer wiped away the tears on her face and put on a strong expression as she followed. At least on the surface, she looked very strong. Wait a minute. Lightning quickly caught up to Ji-dong. He took out something from his storage magic tool and handed it over. He said, It's impossible for the maps sold on the entire continent to show the situation within the Darkness Temple. This map of the interior of the Darkness Temple should be of some use to you. Our organization paid the price of nearly 100 people for this map, and it took decades to complete it. At least, it recorded the general location of the buildings on the surface of the Darkness Temple and some special markings. What Lightning handed to Ji-dong was a brown sheepskin map. This kind of map had been specially processed and would not rot for 100 years. After receiving the map, Ji-dong's expression became much gentler. He knew that this was Lightning's sincerity. This map would be of great help to them, and it was also one of the things Ji-dong needed in order to resist the Heavenly Secrets Organization. After putting the map away, Ji-dong turned around and walked towards the tunnel that they had come from. He gave her father a big hug and then resolutely followed. The other magicians around them looked like they wanted to say something, but they were stopped by Lightning's stern gaze. This was an opportunity that their organization couldn't give up. Bit her lower lip as she followed behind Ji-dong. If her gaze could penetrate the Saint-tier physique, then Ji-dong's body would have already been riddled with holes. Unfortunately, even the Darkness Temple couldn't have such an ability. However, Imoer's emotions were quickly filled with curiosity. This underground tunnel was still pitch black, and there were many forks in the road. Going out was different from going in. The complicated tunnel was two-way, but Ji-dong's speed was extremely fast. He didn't hesitate at any fork, and the path he took was extremely correct. In a short while, he had returned to the entrance of the well. Ji-dong stopped in front of the stone wall in front of him and said, Are you going to open it? Or should I blast it open? He had his back to Imoer as he spoke. Imoer snorted angrily and pressed on the stone wall beside her. With a creaking sound, the exit in front of them opened. Ji-dong's figure flashed, and he slid out like a fish. His figure soared out of the well, and his surroundings lit up. In an instant, he could see the light of day again. Imoer wasn't as fast as Ji-dong. She had to crawl. She poked her head out of the well and glared fiercely at Ji-dong before she flipped herself out. Ji-dong didn't pay attention to her at all. He didn't speak to her and just walked out. Before Mo left the house, she had already put on her disguise. This little girl wouldn't let down her guard just because of her mood. They hadn't taken a few steps when Mo was shocked to see that the heavenly stem holy disciples she had seen in the hotel had already gathered from all directions and were gathering together with Jidong. She couldn't help but shiver. She had thought that she had been extra careful when she had brought Jidong here. She had been constantly observing their surroundings, but she hadn't discovered anything. However, the current situation clearly told her that they had all followed them here. Moreover, from where the heavenly stem holy disciples had appeared, it was clear that they had surrounded the entire house. Just as her father had said, if they weren't careful, the organization's branch here would be completely wiped out. With these people's methods, they wouldn't even leave a trace. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart. Then she recalled what her father had said. That bastard named Jidong was actually level 88 and not level 66. Her heart was even more apprehensive. Could it be that this bastard had also put on a disguise like her? Although he looked young, he was actually in his 70s or 80s. Jidong naturally didn't care about what Amoa was guessing. He nodded to his companions. Although he had been alone, he had been using his soul force to share his situation with his companions. Although his soul cultivation was weaker than the two Tianjis, it was still at the middle stage of the Saint Realm. At the very least, it was easy for him to contact his companions in this city. He didn't even need to repeat what had happened. Everything that had happened in the underground secret room had been transmitted to his companions through his soul force. Jidong said to everyone, "Let's go, we'll leave the city." Saying this, he turned back to look at Amoa. He was hesitating about who should take care of this girl. Amoa was a girl, so it was naturally more convenient for a female holy disciple to take care of her. The first to be rejected by Jidong were Ah Jin and Miao Miao. With Ah Jin's cold personality, if Amoa angered her, she wouldn't be merciful. As for Miao Miao, who came from the demonic alliance, forget it. Amoa was already difficult enough to deal with. If he learned anything from this witch, he would have a headache. As for Du Exener, although she wasn't young anymore, she still had a childish temper. It wasn't difficult to get some information from this weird little girl. Lon Bauer was suitable, but Jidong always felt that he owed her something, so he never asked her to do anything. After thinking about it, he felt that Chun Sichuan was the most suitable. Of course, he also owed Chun Sichuan, and it was a lot that he couldn't pay back. As the saying goes, when you have too many debts, you don't need to worry about them. Thinking of this, he said to Chun Sichuan, "Sichuan, this girl will follow you. Protect her well." With that, he walked out of the city with the heavenly stem holy disciples following him. Chun Sichuan smiled. Hyoheim nodded. However, when Jidong's eyes met her resentful gaze, his mind couldn't help but tremble. He quickly used the divine flame, Saint Monarch armor, to prick himself to stabilize his mind. Chun Sichuan walked to Mo's side and pulled her hand. "Let's go." Mo surprisingly didn't object when Chun Sichuan pulled her. Among the people in front of her, the one she hated the most was undoubtedly Jidong, but the one she was most interested in was Chun Sichuan. She had never thought that a woman could be so perfect. "Sister, is your name Sichuan?" Mo asked Chun Sichuan with a curious expression. "Yes, I'm Chun Sichuan, second with attribute." Mo giggled. Her emotions seemed to have returned to normal. Following sister is much better than following that uncle. Jidong, who was walking in front, stumbled and almost fell to the ground. But in the end, he didn't argue with this little girl and continued to walk forward. He even comforted himself by saying that the age of his two lives added together was almost enough to be her uncle. The heavenly stem holy disciples suppressed their laughter. Miao Miao even turned her head to Chun Sichuan and mouthed the word uncle. Chun Sichuan couldn't help but smile. This was probably the first time that her Jidong had been called uncle. Very soon, they were out of the city. Jidong spread out the map he had bought to determine the direction, then nodded to his companions. Chun Sichuan took Mo with her, and the group flew in the opposite direction of the city they had been in before. They sped up and left. Mo felt a gentle magic coming from Chun Sichuan's hand. and then his body was lifted off the ground. It was as if gravity had lost its effect. Moreover, that gentle power enveloped him, and the scenery around him quickly changed, but he didn't feel a strong wind blowing. So this beautiful sister is also so powerful. Emo returned to look at Chun Sichuan. Although Chun Sichuan had put on her veil again, the way her clothes fluttered in the wind still dazzled Emo. Emo couldn't help but curse in her heart. That weird uncle is so lucky to have such a beautiful big sister like her. Thinking of this, Emo couldn't help but look up at Chun Sichuan and ask, "Sister, you're so beautiful. How could you like that strange uncle? He's so ugly, and he's so arrogant. How could he be worthy of you?" In front of them, Ji Dong's face stiffened. An uncle was an uncle, so what? How did he become a strange uncle in such a short time? Chun Sichuan also giggled at Mo.'s words. You can't judge a person by their appearance. You just haven't seen Ji Dong's good points. Mo said innocently. So you also think that his appearance isn't worthy of you? Chun Sichuan was stunned. Only now did she realize that she had fallen for this little girl's trick. She was clearly trying to sow discord, and she did it so naturally. She really lived up to Ji Dong's strange comments. She shook her head and said, I'm not worthy of him. Chapter 587. She didn't expect that Chun Sichuan would give such an answer. She said in surprise, Sister, are you sure? You're not good enough for him? Chun Sichuan shook her head. I'm not wrong. I'm not good enough for him. He still hasn't accepted me. Emma was stunned for a few seconds before she said something that made the heavenly stem holy disciples break out in a cold sweat. He can't be that impotent, right? Uff. Meow Meow couldn't hold it in any longer. She burst out laughing. Ji Dong's face darkened as he glared at Mo. He couldn't take it anymore. He was really afraid that he wouldn't be able to stop himself from crushing the little girl to death. With a flick of his finger, he sealed Mo's ability to speak. In just a short while, they were already far away from the city. Ji Dong's eyes flashed, and a thick black and white light shot out from his chest. The sacred evolution fire dragon's enormous figure appeared before Mo's eyes in shock. Previously, when Shanlei had told her that Ji Dong could have killed a holy ruler by himself, she had not thought much of it. However, now that she had seen the tyrannical body of the sacred evolution fire dragon appear before her, she finally understood that her father's judgment was probably correct. Ji Dong thought for a moment, then said to the others, Let's just have Mao Tai and Wu Yangye carry us over. That way, we'll be less of target. The weight of 11 people was nothing to the sacred evolution fire dragon's powerful body. They didn't need more magical beasts to increase their attack power. Protecting themselves was the most important thing. However, Ji Dong wasn't in a hurry to leave with the others. He had the sacred evolution fire dragon protect them and had Tianji look after Mo for the time being. He and the other holy disciples sat down where they were, leaving behind an unrestricted teleportation formation in case they needed it. Teleportation formations were the only ones that couldn't be used in battle. However, Ji Dong knew that it was precisely this teleportation formation that couldn't be used in battle that was their most important ability. If they could leave a teleportation formation in some important places, then no matter how they wreaked havoc on the continent, they would still have space to move about. Previously, it had been too dangerous on the Holy Evil Island, but now that they were here, they naturally wouldn't have to worry about being discovered. No matter how strong Tianji was, if he couldn't touch them, how could he use his strength? Ji Dong's goal was to make it so that Tianji wouldn't even be able to see his shadow for the next 1.5 years. Ji Dong's figure flashed, and he landed on Mao Tai's head. Chun Sichuan brought Mo to Wu Yangye's head as well. Mo couldn't calm down at all, other than her little hand being held by Chun Sichuan. She looked left and right, full of curiosity about the sacred evolution fire dragon. It wasn't that she hadn't seen dragons before, but it was the first time she had seen such a strange dragon with 2 heads. Unfortunately, she couldn't speak now. Otherwise, she would definitely say to Ji Dong, Strange uncle riding strange mount. Mist emanated from the sacred evolution fire dragon's body. Its 9 claws exerted force, and its huge body carried the heavenly stem holy disciples into the sky. Under Ji Dong's guidance, it flew straight in the direction of the divine temple of darkness. Making a 15-year-old girl unable to speak was definitely a disaster for her. After a while, Amor couldn't hold it in anymore. She could only use her eyes to plead with Chen Xishuan. Seeing her pitiful appearance, Chen Xishuan couldn't help but find it funny. She smiled and said, "Can you promise not to speak nonsense?" Amor hurriedly nodded obediently. Only then did Chen Xishuan casually undo her restriction. Amor stuck out her tongue and glanced at Ji Dong on the other side. Ji Dong wore a white robe, and he stood on Mao Tai's white head. They complemented each other. His hands were behind his back, and his black hair fluttered in the wind. Although he wasn't very handsome, his outstanding temperament caused Mo to be stunned. She thought to herself, this strange uncle isn't too ugly after all. Big Sister Sichuan, where are we going? Mo asked Chen Sichuan. She was blocked by the clouds, and she didn't have the soul strength that Ji Dong shared with her. She could only see a vast expanse of whiteness. The feeling of the unknown was very uncomfortable. Chen Sichuan smiled and said, "The Dark Temple. Are you going to walk into a trap?" Hearing that they were going to the Black God Temple, Mo was startled. She shivered. She had heard many stories about the Black God Temple. Although she had never truly gone there, in her impression, the place where the heavenly secrets lived was no different from hell. Chen Sichuan smiled and didn't answer. Mo couldn't help feeling bored. However, she wasn't worried. She was filled with curiosity and excitement. The Dark Temple. They were actually going to the Dark Temple. That was a place that her father and the others in the organization didn't dare to go. It was the headquarters of dark divination, as well as the headquarters of the Dark Devil Army. It could be said that it was the foundation of dark divination's power. Even if the majority of the Dark Devil Army was stationed on the Holy Evil Island, the defenses of the Dark Temple wouldn't relax. "Strange uncle, are we really going to the Dark Temple? What are we going there for?" Seeing that Chen Sichuan wasn't answering her, Mo called out to Hioheim. Ji Dong didn't even look at her. He indifferently said, "To kill people." Mo curled her lips and said, "Can you do it?" This little girl was very smart. She didn't want to be the target of everyone. She was asking if he could do it, not whether they could do it or not. Ji Dong indifferently said, "If you still want to continue talking, then don't try to provoke me. You'll know when you see it. This is also what I agreed with your father." Mo pouted. She really didn't dare to try to provoke Ji Dong anymore. Being on the back of the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon, she couldn't feel the speed. The Heavenly Stem Saints were sitting cross-legged and cultivating. They didn't miss any time to cultivate. Only Ji Dong was standing there. He had to use the map to identify the direction, so that the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon wouldn't take a detour. Mo could only sit in front of Chen Sichuan board. At the beginning, she was still in high spirits. But after a long time, there was always a thick white mist around them. No matter how good her mood was, it would be wiped out. Just as she was wondering whether she should cultivate or not, Chen Sichuan handed her something. Mo was the same as Ji Dong. She was also a Fire Devil Master, Ain Fire Devil. What Chen Sichuan handed her was a Devil Master's triple crown from the Five Elements continent. The reason she didn't give her a bigger one was because it would be easier for Mo to absorb. Mo looked at Chen Sichuan in surprise. She naturally knew that a radiant crystal crown that she could absorb was very valuable in the Five Elements continent. At the very least, she had never heard of anyone in her organization obtaining a radiant crystal crown for cultivation. "Big sister, you want to give this to me?" Mo was pleasantly surprised. Chen Sichuan smiled and nodded. "Your talent isn't bad. Don't waste it. No matter how smart you are, you still need strength to back it up. Don't you want to become stronger?" "Of course I do. Thank you, big sister." Mo excitedly accepted the radiant crystal crown. This strange little girl finally calmed down. She sat in front of Chen Sichuan and began to cultivate. However, this was her first time absorbing a radiant crystal crown, so she didn't know where to start. Chen Sichuan placed a hand on Mo's back. Gentle emu mana flowed into her body, guiding her mana to absorb the radiant crystal crown. Imu would gave birth to Imu fire, which complemented each other. Very quickly, Imo entered a meditative state with Chun Sichuan's help. Chun Sichuan helped Imo, because she really liked this cute little girl. She also wanted this little girl to calm down so that she wouldn't disturb Jidong. On the five-element continent, Jidong could be said to be the brain of the heavenly stem holy disciples. On the surface, he seemed to be able to arrange everything neatly. Even when he was surrounded by dark secrets, he was still able to break through. But in reality, the heavenly stem holy disciples knew how much pressure Jidong was under. Chun Sichuan naturally knew this even better. She didn't want this little girl in front of her to disturb her man's state of mind. As a confidant, Chun Sichuan's heart was completely on Jidong. Everything she did was naturally for Jidong's sake. Mo calmed down and also entered a meditative state. Jidong suddenly felt a lot more peaceful. He turned to look at Chun Sichuan and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Sichuan, do I really deserve this treatment from you? The Divine Darkness Temple was located in the west of the center of the Five Elements continent. In other words, the Holy Evil Island was the closest direction to the Divine Darkness Temple from all directions. The Heavenly Stem Holy Disciples had already flown for a day. The Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon continued to fly for about 2 days. They were gradually approaching the Divine Darkness Temple. Due to the continuous supply of Chun Sichuan's Radiant Crystal Crown, Mo really became well-behaved. She was so smart. How could she let go of such a good opportunity? With Chun Sichuan's help, her original level, 32 magic power, had increased by 1.5 in just over a day. Seeing that she was about to break through to level 34, she couldn't care less about looking for trouble with Jidong. She cultivated diligently, hoping that the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon could fly a little longer. The others were still in a meditative state. Only Tianji had already come to Jidong's side. Tianji looked a little nervous and uneasy. It was no wonder that he was like this. How many years had the light and darkness been fighting? How many years had the two Tianji existed? This was the first time that the light Tianji could step into the true territory of the dark Tianji. Not to mention what they could do, just this alone was extremely important. Jidong held the map he got from the shop and looked at it carefully. He constantly scanned the terrain below with his soul power. He nodded to Tianji and said, "We're almost there. Less than 500 miles away. We'll arrive in at most an hour." "Tianji, are you nervous?" Tianji nodded and said, "A little. The darkness and light have been fighting for so many years. I'm a first Tianji to be able to set foot here. To be honest, I'm both excited and nervous now." He was not much older than Jidong. After all, he was still a young man. Jidong smiled and said, "Since we're here, we'll leave a deep impression on the Divine Darkness Temple." Tianji said, "What do you plan to do? Let everyone release their strength and attack head-on, or sneak in?" Jidong said, "Although a head-on attack is much faster, and we can catch them off guard with a thunderous force, it doesn't fit our main objective. Our first mission is to obtain the 2 water-attributed divine weapons, and then we'll destroy this place. If we attack with great fanfare, they'll definitely hide the divine weapons even more secretively. There's another problem, and that's the Dark Tianji. Even Heavenly Stem holy disciples like us can obtain a teleportation formation. Who knows if the Dark Tianji has one too? Although he's not a Heavenly Stem holy disciple, if the Dark Heavenly Stem holy disciple also has a teleportation formation of the 5 elements, it'll be enough to bring him back here in a short period of time. If that really happens, we'll be in danger. If we don't need the divine weapons, we can use a few ultimate techniques and leave quickly. However, we can't do that now. Therefore, we can only sneak into the Divine Darkness Temple, and we have to be extremely careful. We'll try our best not to be discovered as long as possible. Once we obtain the divine weapons, we'll be able to do whatever we want." As he spoke, Jidong had already controlled the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon to land on the ground. At the same time, he used his soul to wake up his companions who were cultivating. "We'll leave a teleportation formation here too." Jidong explained to his companions why they were staying here. They chose a call on a hill, and the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon landed steadily. The clouds and mist dissipated, and the surrounding scenery appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Ji-dong said, "The closer the teleportation formation, the shorter the preparation time for teleportation. This place is about 250 miles away from the Divine Darkness Temple, so it's a suitable place to leave a teleportation formation. If we encounter any trouble in the Divine Darkness Temple, everyone can rush back immediately. With this distance, we'll have enough time to teleport back to the city we left behind previously. Although the sole power of a peak saint-level Dark Tianji is powerful, it's not enough to cover such a distance. Moreover, leaving a teleportation formation here will make it convenient for us to come back." A cold light flashed across his eyes. Chapter 588. A faint light flickered as Ji-dong revealed a cold expression. After a simple explanation, he brought his companions to sit in a circle and began to set up the teleportation formation. In truth, even if he didn't explain, the heavenly stem saints wouldn't question him. However, Ji-dong wouldn't do that. He needed his companions' trust and perfect cooperation, not blind obedience. Emo had already woken up from her cultivation. When she opened her eyes, she saw Ji-dong's overflowing killing intent. She shivered, and her dazed mind immediately cleared up. She stood up and jumped off the sacred evolution fire dragon's back, looking around. Of course, she couldn't recognize where she was. She was surrounded by a vast expanse of barren hills. There were only a few withered trees standing alone on the hills. It looked very bleak. Seeing this, her eyes couldn't help but become a lot more gloomy. No matter what, the Five Elements continent was her home. Emo, what are you thinking about? Tianji's gentle voice rang in her ears. Emo raised her head to look at Tianji. Tianji was handsome and had a scholarly temperament, somewhat similar to her father. Of course, he was much younger, and his gentle aura made her feel very comfortable. "What are they doing?" Emo curiously asked, avoiding Tianji's question. Tianji smiled. "I can't tell you that. This is a secret of the Heavenly Stem Saints. I can only say that this is a method to protect themselves. Perhaps you'll see it soon." Emo looked at Tianji and said, "They're all doing this, so why aren't you participating? Aren't the 10 Heavenly Stem Saints one body? When we were over there, they were also activating their mana like this, but you didn't participate. Is that strange, uncle pushing you aside?" Tianji laughed and said, "Little girl, you're really talkative. How could Ji-dong possibly push me aside? If you want to sow discord, you've chosen the wrong target. I still need some time. Let me tell you a story. Do you want to hear it?" Emo was pleasantly surprised. "A story? Okay. Hurry up and tell me." A look of reminiscence appeared in Tianji's eyes. He calmly said, "Once upon a time, there was a boy named Yun. He had a beautiful and kind older sister. When he was very young, their parents passed away one after another. Yun was raised by his older sister who was 5 years older than him. When he was young, in order to feed him, his older sister would do odd jobs for a noble family every day. At that time, she was only 10 years old, but she was able to support this small but warm family. Everything the older sister did was for Yun. Girls of the same age as her all had a pair of delicate hands, but the older sister's hands were very rough. Even in the cold winter, she had to wash clothes for others, just to feed Yun. When he was 10, the older sister used all the savings she had accumulated over the years to send Yun to a magician academy to have his mana tested. She knew that becoming a yin and yang magician was the only chance for Yun to change his fate. This was the same as your 5 Elements Dark Continent. However, in the 5 Elements Light Continent, the status of a magician is not as high as here. For Yun's older sister could be said to have sacrificed everything. For as long as Yun could remember, the clothes on the older sister's body never had less than 5 patches. Yun did not disappoint the older sister. During the innate attribute test, he was found to have a 90% yang water talent. He was exempted from the test, and his tuition was also waived. All expenses were covered by the academy. From then on, the older sister's life became a little more comfortable. Finally, she no longer had to worry about food and clothing. After a few years, in the process of studying in the academy, Yin only had one thought in his heart, and that was to let his sister live a good life, a happy life. So, he trained hard day and night, and at the age of 13, he successfully condensed the yin-yang crown. At the age of 15, he broke through to the double crown, becoming the youngest double crown devil master in the history of the academy. Furthermore, he was chosen by the city lord of Tianji City as a candidate for Tianji, and thus changed his name to Yin Tianji. When he was 20, he would compete with the other candidates to determine whether or not he could become the next Tianji, which is the bright Tianji. Yin was the youngest of all the Tianji candidates, but his magic power was the highest. Because of this, when he entered the Advanced Academy, he received a reward of 10 gold coins. Yun's hard work made my sister very happy, and she said that she would save this money for him to marry and have children in the future. Yin made up his mind to work hard to repay the older sister. Every day, he studied and practiced with all his might. However, at this time, his dream was shattered. At this point, Yin Tianji's originally calm tone gradually became agitated. Yin had a senior called Kai Lu who usually took good care of him. One day, Yin invited Kai Lu home as a guest. He saw Yun's older sister. Although Yun's older sister worked hard every day to make a living, she was still extremely beautiful. At that time, Kai Lu didn't show anything, and Yin still treated him as a good friend. However, who would have thought that 2 days later, while Yin was in class, he would take advantage of Yun's time to bring Shi Shaolei, the second son of the #1 noble family in Tianji City, to Yun's older sister's home. Shi Shaolei was famous for being a spoiled playboy. He actually raped Yun's older sister. When Yin returned home, he only saw his older sister sobbing on the bed. No matter how much he asked, she wouldn't tell him what had happened. Later, Yin understood that his older sister was afraid that he would be harmed by those people. The next morning, when Yin finished his cultivation as usual, he saw that the table was still the same as before. His older sister had made breakfast for him. After eating breakfast, he prepared to ask his older sister about what had happened the day before. However, what he saw was his older sister's corpse. She had already hung herself. She didn't even leave behind a single word. Hearing this, Moer couldn't help but cover her mouth. She stared at Yin Tianji with her large eyes, and a layer of mist appeared in her beautiful eyes. Yin is so hateful. Why did my older sister, who was fine the day before, suddenly commit suicide? It was his neighbor who told him that he had seen Shi Shaolei and Kai Lu go to his house. He went to the academy to find Shi Shaolei and pretended to be servile. Shi Shaolei, that bastard, actually proudly told him that his sister tasted good and said that she would definitely take care of him in the future. Yin did not kill him. For such a bastard, killing him was too easy on him. How could Shi Shaolei's body, which had long been hollowed out by wine and women, be a match for Yin? Yin castrated this bastard and even cut off the tendons of his hands and feet. He wanted this bastard to suffer for the rest of his life. Moer clapped her hands and said, Yin did too well. He wanted that bastard to suffer a fate worse than death. Tianji looked at Moer, then turned his gaze to Ji Dong, who was sitting there leading the Heavenly Stem holy disciples to use the teleportation formation. He said, It's not over yet. Sure, Viscount's influence in that city is too great. Shi Shaolei's older brother, Shi Delay, brought Qin Lu and his subordinates to chase after Yin. Yin couldn't fight against so many people, so he could only escape from the city. But how could he escape from so many people? These bastards are about to catch up to him. Can you imagine what will happen if he's caught up to by these people? Moer didn't interrupt Tianji. She just nodded and covered her mouth with her hands. Her eyes widened as she waited for him to continue. She was already completely immersed in the story. At that time, a youth who was even younger than Yin appeared. He defeated Yun's enemies and saved Yin. At that time, Yin had already sunk into a state of madness. He told the youth that as long as he was willing to avenge him, he would be his slave in the future. The youth didn't directly agree to him. He only asked him what had happened and brought him back to the city to find Yun's neighbor to confirm everything. After that, he didn't say anything else and went with Yin to Viscount Shi's house. At this point, Yin Tianji paused, but his eyes were filled with murderous intent. Was that young man very powerful? What was the result? Moer asked impatiently. Tianji looked at her deeply and said, other than the innocent servants, the evil Sher Viscount Sher's family was not spared. Moer heaved a sigh of relief and murmured, finally, there was an acceptable result. Tianji continued, after everything was over, Yin wanted to recognize that young man as his master. But the young man didn't agree and wanted to leave. Yin said that he wanted to follow him. He wanted to use his entire life to repay such a great favor. Even if the young man didn't recognize him, he would still be Yun's master for life. Moer sighed in admiration. That young man's character is really good. He's so strong, but he hates evil and doesn't take advantage of others. Tianji nodded and said, you're right. That young man is definitely a master worth following for life. In my story, the young man who avenged Yun was Ji Dong. Moer was shocked. She looked at Ji Dong in disbelief and said, It's this strange uncle? Impossible. I don't believe you. You're definitely making up a story to fool me, right? 2 streams of tears flowed down Tianji's cheeks. He said, Moer, do you know that I'm the one who wants this to be a story the most? Because I'm the main character of this story, Yin. When Moer, who was still trying to defend himself, heard this, he was completely stunned. He stared at Tianji in front of him, unable to say a single word. He kept repeating in his heart, Yin, he's Yin? Moer had lost her mother since she was a child. She felt that she was already very pitiful. But compared to the Yun in the story, which was Tianji, she was much luckier. At the very least, she had lived under her father's protection since she was young. She could eat her fill and wear her clothes. She could also learn from her father. She also had the love of her father and the elders. But Yun only had an older sister. His older sister had been raped by bad people and committed suicide. Compared to him, she was much luckier. Yun, don't cry. It's my fault. I won't say bad things about this strange uncle in the future, okay? Moer lifted her hand and gently wiped away the tears on Tianji's face. Tianji's heart trembled. At this moment, there was a warm feeling that flowed into his heart. He rubbed Moer's head and said, Little girl, I just want to tell you that Ji Dong isn't a bad person. He's a warm-hearted person. Everything he did to you before was for everyone's safety. If you really wanted to harm him, I'm afraid that no one here would let you go. As for why I didn't activate the formation with them, it's because I'm not a part of the Heavenly Stem Holy Disciples. Don't forget, Ji Dong has dual fire mana. He's a dual attribute Holy Disciple. Moer was stunned. If you're not a Holy Disciple, then why are you with them? Is it because you've always been following that strange uncle? No, that Ji Dong? Tianji shook his head and said softly, Did you forget what I just said? I'm the Tianji City Lord's choice. In other words, I'm this generation's Tianji. In the words of your 5 elements continent, I'm the opposite of darkness Tianji, light Tianji. The words bright heaven's secrets shocked Mo even more than when he found out that heaven's secrets was Yun. The impression that darkness heaven's secrets had left on the continent was simply too deep. When Mo heard that heaven's secrets was the opposite of darkness heaven's secrets, he was completely dumbfounded. This seemingly harmless, refined, and handsome youth was actually the light Tianji that was on par with darkness Tianji. He even told me stories and told me so many things. Heavens, he's actually light Tianji. Even though she seemed to have heard Ji Dong and the others refer to this young man as Tianji before, she had never associated him with the words bright Tianji. This time, she was incomparably shocked. At this time, the Heavenly Stem Holy Disciples had finished setting up the teleportation formation and were walking back. Ji Dong saw Moer standing there in a daze and couldn't help asking, Tianji, did you use your soul force to control her? Why is she so stupid? You're the one who's stupid. Moer recovered, but she still couldn't help asking, Is he really Tianji? Yao, Qianshu interrupted. What's there to be suspicious about? He's with us, Heavenly Stem Holy Disciples. If he's not Tianji, then how could he be fake? Moer grabbed Chun Sichuan's hand and smiled bitterly. I'm a little dizzy. Let me rest for a while. Meow Meow chuckled. Little Mo, it's fine if you're dizzy. Just don't vomit when we get there. Mo asked doubtfully. Are you guys going to a disgusting place? Meow Meow said, No, we're going to create a disgusting massacre. Are you afraid? Mo snorted. I'm not afraid. I've seen many dead people since I was young. But is he really light Tianji? Everyone was speechless. Chapter 589. The Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon set off again. After hearing Tianji's story, Mo's hostility toward Jidong lessened significantly. However, the way she looked at Tianji had changed. She kept staring at Tianji to the point where the Tianji sniper rifle's hair stood on end. Meow Meow was also standing beside Chen Xishuan. When she saw Mo's expression, she couldn't help but tease. What? Have you taken a fancy to Tianji? Do you need me to tell him for you? I can guarantee you that Tianji is still a virgin. He's never had a woman before. Mo blushed and said, What nonsense are you talking about? Who has taken a fancy to him? Meow Meow chuckled and said, So what if you've taken a fancy to him? Age isn't a problem. He's only a little more than 10 years older than you. If you were to be with him, you would be the first love between two continents. That would be the true fusion of light and darkness. If you keep talking nonsense, I'm going to get angry. Emor put her hands on her hips and said angrily to Meow Meow. Meow Meow giggled and said, All right, I won't say any more. Before Emor could heave a sigh of relief, she heard Meow Meow mutter, If they really get together, will their child be of the light attribute or the darkness attribute? Mo's body swayed, and she almost fell off the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon's back. Fortunately, Chen Xishuan was there to hold her back. She glared at Meow Meow angrily. Meow Meow stopped teasing her. Perhaps they weren't Mo's match when it came to being mischievous, but in terms of evil thoughts, Mo and Meow Meow were still a long way off. The Heavenly Stem Saints didn't enter a state of cultivation again. After arriving at the Five Elements continent, their first battle was about to begin. Right now, they were all doing their best to adjust their condition. The Darkness Temple was their first stop. They had to show the Five Elements continent their strongest point. Jidong was even more focused. His soul power was sweeping the area as he sensed all the living beings on the ground. In the west, the sun gradually set. The afterglow of the sunset dyed the sky red and the sky gradually darkened. The Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon flew for another 400 kilometers before slowly descending under Jidong's command. The next moment, Jidong's soul power was already closely linked with his companions. This time, Mo was included. Mo suddenly felt her mind clear up. It was as if everything around her had become exceptionally clear. In her mind, a lot of distance data even appeared. Before she could scream, Jidong's voice rang out in her mind. If you don't want to die, keep quiet. I'm sharing my soul detection with you now. You just need to follow Sichuan and don't do anything else. If you think you can't control your mouth, I don't mind helping you seal it again. Mo's voice appeared in her mind. This strange situation immediately stunned her. Although she glared at Jidong, she didn't make a sound in the end. However, she quickly realized where they were. Jidong's spiritual scry had given them a distant view of the distance, and it was transmitted into everyone's mind. 100 kilometers in front of them was darkness. Everything was shrouded in a thick black fog. It was pitch black, just like the map Jidong had bought. Could this be? Mo's eyes widened. Chen Xishuan's voice rang out in Mo's mind. That's right. This is the Darkness Temple, our destination. You need to remember everything we've done so that you can tell your father when you return. This is the basis of our cooperation. Do you understand? Only then did Mo remember what her father had told her before they had left. 2 days. In just 2 days, they had actually reached the vicinity of the Darkness Temple. Heavens, how fast did that strange two-headed fellow fly? Jidong withdrew the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon into his core of life. His voice rang out in the minds of his companions. I've checked carefully just now. There are already sentries of the Dark Demon Army within 100 kilometers of the Darkness Temple. I'm afraid there won't be a suitable place to rest if we go any further. Next, we'll have to advance step by step. In order to avoid alerting the dark demon army stationed in the Darkness Temple, I didn't use my soul power to probe into the black fog. We'll think of a way to enter after we get close. Let's go. As he spoke, Ji-dong took the lead and flew forward. Thanks to his spiritual sharing, he could clearly see where the sentries were located in their minds. Ji-dong, should we clear out those sentries? Killing one of these dark demon masters means one less, Ajin and Hyoheim said. Ji-dong shook his head. No. According to the map Shanlei gave me, the dark demon masters here rotate every 2 to 4 hours. The dark magicians here rotate every 2 to 4 hours. If we get rid of the sentries outside, then the time we can enter will be greatly limited. Furthermore, we don't know the exact time of the rotation, so let's try our best to avoid the sentries outside. Chen Sichuan pulled Mo. Lang Tianyi brought Tianji, and the group quietly sped up. Under the guidance of Ji-dong's soul detection, they slowly approached the Darkness Temple. Unless there was an enemy whose soul power was not weaker than Ji-dong's, as long as it was a living creature, it would not be able to escape Ji-dong's detection. The defense of the Darkness Temple was very tight. There were soldiers in black armor constantly moving around. Fortunately, there was a dense forest outside the Darkness Temple, which gave Ji-dong and the others cover. Apart from the soldiers, there were also many dark demon masters patrolling. The total number was unknown, but in the direction they entered, Ji-dong had already discovered dozens of them. Moreover, their cultivation was not weak, at least 4 crowns. Their positions were messy, and they often wandered and changed directions. Without Ji-dong's soul detection, it was almost impossible to enter from the ground without bumping into them. Moreover, these dark demon masters would often release their demonic power to a certain range. Through this method, they could detect whether there were enemies underground or in the surroundings. Together with the ordinary soldiers, the defense was extremely tight. Mo's heart was in her throat. Since she was young, she had heard the words Darkness Temple so much that her ears were about to grow calluses. However, this was the first time she was so close to the legendary gathering place of demons. How could she not be nervous? At this time, she did not dare to cause trouble for Ji-dong. She focused and held her breath, allowing Chen Sichuan to lead her. Her large eyes kept looking around, as if she was afraid that a dark demon master would suddenly jump out. Unfortunately, under Ji-dong's lead, how could such a situation happen? A distance of 50 kilometers was relatively far for ordinary people, but it was nothing for the Heavenly Stem holy disciples. Since they had to avoid the sentries, it only took them more than 2 hours to pass through the 50 kilometers of forest. The dense black fog was already in sight. With their speed, even if they were seen by ordinary soldiers, they would probably just be dazzled. When they were about a kilometer away from the thick black fog, Ji-dong stopped and gestured for everyone to rest for the time being. Tianji came to Ji-dong's side and said softly, "That's right, it's here. I can already clearly sense the existence of the 2 divine artifacts. Let me see what this black fog is." As he said that, Tianji closed his eyes and the eye of the heavenly secret opened between his eyebrows. Back when he followed the previous Tianji in cultivation and inherited his legacy, the previous Tianji had activated the Eye of the Heavenly Secret. However, at that time, the Eye of the Heavenly Secret was only in its embryonic form. It was like a groove waiting to be embedded. After he truly obtained the Eye of the Heavenly Secret, his ability to illuminate the Heavenly Secret was truly displayed. When the Eye of the Heavenly Secret opened, it revealed a gentle light. It quietly observed the black fog in front of them. The dense black fog did not change because of the gentle light. The Heavenly Stem Divine, followers very naturally split up. The indistinct staff of the Goddess of Earth had already been inserted into the ground beneath their feet. Although everything outside was enveloped by Ji-dong's soul force, who knew what would appear in the black fog. As the saying went, it was better to be safe than sorry. No one dared to be careless here. The Eye of the Heavenly Secrets slowly closed. Tianji opened his eyes again and said solemnly, "It's very troublesome. The composition of the black fog is extremely complicated. It's mainly composed of water elements. but there are also toxins and powerful soul pulses mixed in. It's completely a barrier of the divine darkness temple. If I'm not wrong, the demon masters of the Dark Demon Army must have some sort of special item or a special passage or method to enter without being discovered. Ji Dong said, "Can we use the soul force to envelop everyone and enter? Can we block their soul probing?" Tianji shook his head and said, "We can't. The soul pulses scan horizontally continuously. To put it simply, it's like a wall or a boundary. Once we touch the boundary, even if they can't sense what we are, they will immediately discover that outsiders have entered. We won't be able to enter without being discovered." Embark, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly lowered his voice and said, "Our organization has sent hundreds of people in. Look at the map. The Darkness Temple is like a city. There's a big river that's 100 meters wide and more than 40 meters deep. There are many of these graphite octopuses inside, and they're watched over by professionals. With these things, there's no need for too many people to defend inside. As long as someone observes the reactions of the graphite octopuses, it'll be enough. Once the demonic fog is triggered, it'll affect the rest of the Darkness Temple. The slightest touch will cause all of the demonic fog to churn crazily, and the area that's invaded will appear in a vortex shape. This is enough to give the Darkness Demon Army an accurate location." Embark, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly said in a low voice, "Our organization has sent hundreds of people inside. Some of them directly joined the Dark Demon Army. After more than 100 years of hard work, we finally managed to draw a map inside. I heard from my father that the demonic fog outside the Darkness Temple is spat out by a creature called the Graphite Octopus. This creature doesn't have any attack power, but it's superior in its sensitive spiritual sense. As long as you enter the range of the demonic fog, you'll be discovered immediately." Yao Qianshu said exasperatedly, "Damn, I just want to say that Darkness Tianji is really afraid of death. Not only does he have so many dark demon masters guarding him, he also has to make this thing." Ji Dong said, "This divine Darkness Tianji isn't just for defense. At the same time, it also gives people a sense of mystery. It's perfect for deceiving commoners. Hasn't Darkness Tianji always made himself into a godlike existence?" "Young master, I have a way to go in." Lang Tiany's voice suddenly rang out. After using the pearl of thick earth to break through to the 9 crowns, he had clearly changed. His skin had an additional layer of luster, and he looked taller. "Oh, you have a way?" Ji Dong looked at Lang Tiany in surprise. Lang Tiany nodded and said, "I'm an earth demon master. If I cooperate with Meow Meow, I think we can go through underground. Although this divine darkness temple is strong, it only covers the ground. Even if there's a river inside, and with the corrosion of the divine darkness temple, the underground defense is only about 100 meters. So, underground should be the only possibility." Yao Qianshu said, "You mean we should dig a tunnel to get through?" Meow Meow interrupted. "With his pearl of thick earth, why would we need a tunnel? Let alone 100 meters. Even if it's 200 meters deep, we can easily get through." Ji Dong nodded and said, "Okay, then let's do that. That works?" Mo looked at Lang Tiany, who kept calling Ji Dong young master in shock. At first, she only thought that Ji Dong was very strong. Then she thought that Chun Sichuan was very strong, and then she found out about Light Tianji's existence. Now, this tall youth in front of her actually said that he could go underground. Were these people all monsters? She had encountered Earth Demon Masters before, but to say that one could bring so many people underground, she had never heard of one. Tianji and Ji Dong looked at each other and said, "I'll be in charge of covering, and you'll be in charge of scouting." Ji Dong nodded and said, "Let's go. Tiany, it's all up to you." Lang Tiany had everyone gathered together, with Mo, and Tianji in the middle. Tianji's eyes flashed with silver light, and a silver light enveloped everyone. The silver light was very gentle, and it didn't spread out. If one only felt their aura, they wouldn't be able to feel the people inside, even if they stuck close to the silver light. Tianji had already used his soul force to completely isolate the outside world, and no mana fluctuations, light, or aura would leak out. Lang Tianyi opened his mouth and spat out. Instantly, the perfectly round, thick earth pearl floated out. At the same time, the 9 Earth Crown Sun Crown also rose from his head. 9 crowns, level 92. This was his current magic power level. Chapter 590. Emor felt like she was about to faint. Only now did she truly understand what the power of a holy disciple was. These people in front of her were only about 10 years older than her, and some might not even be 10 years older than her. But each one of them was more monstrous than the last. This Lang Tianyi fellow had a devil energy even higher than Ji Dong's. Heavens, he was a 92nd level paragon, a 9 crowns paragon, the heavenly dipper of the earth element. But such a paragon actually called Ji Dong, young master. A gentle yellow light enveloped everyone's bodies, and Miasma's staff of the goddess of earth also emitted a faint gray light. Yellow and gray intertwined, and everyone's bodies slowly sank into the ground without warning. In the blink of an eye, their surroundings darkened, and they were completely submerged underground. Lang Tianyi's eyes had completely turned the same yellow as the pearl of thick earth. After entering underground, with the pearl of thick earth, he did not need Ji Dong soul detection at all. The situation in the surrounding soil was clearly displayed in his perception, and he continued to lead everyone deeper. Miasma's function was to use the staff of the goddess of earth to soften the soil and rocks around them, helping Lang Tianyi to bring everyone deeper underground. Emor patted her chest lightly. She no longer hated her father at all. In just a few days, she felt that everything she had experienced was more magical than the previous 10 years combined. Previously, she had flown into the sky, and now she was diving into the ground. It was really full of magical colors. She was now very excited to see what these heavenly dry disciples would do after entering the dark temple. Her hatred for Ji Dong had also disappeared without a trace. The pearl of thick earth continued to emit that rich yellow light, giving people a sense of peace and stability. Ji Dong sighed inwardly in admiration. No wonder it was ranked first among the 3 divine artifacts of the foolishly rich merchant guild. This pearl of thick earth really did have its own uniqueness. With this divine artifact, Lang Tianyi could now hold his own. It should be known that after Ajin, he was the second heavenly stem holy disciple to reach the level of 9 crowns. He had caught up from behind and even surpassed Fury, who had gone to Dark's secret side. Other than Emor, the heavenly dry disciple's soul cultivation was not low. Everyone could feel their bodies sinking rapidly, and it was sinking in a straight line. Along the way, if they encountered any hard rocks, how could they resist the tiny staff of the goddess of earth and Lang Tianyi's pearl of thick earth? In the process of sinking, they maintained a stable speed. No one felt any pressure. The power of the divine artifact could be seen from this. When they were about to reach the target depth of 200 meters, the sinking speed slowed down and finally stopped. Ji Dong discovered that the range of his soul power's detection was greatly limited underground. After all, there was no air in the soil and rocks. However, he could finally release his soul power to investigate quietly. Of course, he could feel the existence of a large amount of soil. As he continued to move upwards, he discovered that the soil was still hard. When he was about 100 meters from the surface, there was a large amount of granite blocking him. Clearly, this layer of granite was the bottom of the Darkness Divine Temple's moat. This was clearly a man-made river. Looking down from the sky, the area of the Darkness Divine Temple was at least 3 times the size of Zhongyuan City. How much manpower and resources would be needed to build such a moat with the granite at the bottom? Clearly, this was not done by the current generation of Dark Tianji. From this, one could see the selfish nature of the previous generations of Dark Tianji. The situation of the Darkness 5 Elements continent facing now was definitely not caused by the current generation of Dark Tianji. The so-called faith was simply a joke. If it wasn't for the powerful backing of his subordinates, Dark Tianji would have been killed countless times by the crazy civilians of the Darkness continent. After reaching this conclusion, Ji Dong's judgment of the current situation changed. He could now be sure that what the Radiant Five Elements continent had to face was not the entire Darkness Five Elements continent, but Dark Tianji and his lackeys. As long as they could defeat Dark Tianji once and kill him, the so-called Holy War would not happen at all. As long as the Darkness Five Elements continent did not have Dark Tianji, the so-called Holy War would not exist at all, and they would not have any follow-up forces. However, at the thought of this, Ji Dong realized another problem. If they could really defeat Dark Tianji and his army, what would happen next? Would the Radiant Five Elements continent give up such a good opportunity? The answer was bound to be no. Perhaps the five empires of the Radiant continent would immediately launch an anti-invasion war. With the current situation of the Darkness continent, it was impossible for them to have the power to stop it. Although the Radiant continent could not be like Dark Tianji, as long as there was a war, people would die, and the ones who suffered were the civilians. This was also not what Ji Dong wanted to see. Thinking of this, Ji Dong couldn't help but admire the first generation of Light and Dark Tianji saints. It was them who built the Holy Evil Island. With the barrier of the Holy Evil Island, the two continents were separated and each enjoyed its own culture. Unfortunately, it was difficult to repeat the grand occasion of the past. Now, the dominant position of the Darkness Five Elements continent was no longer the Dark Saints, but the peak saint-level Dark Tianji. Everything was still too early to say. If one day he could really reach the god level, then he must launch the ultimate killing technique, just like the flaming bar, to continue to block the two continents. Ji Dong understood that the reason why the Red Lotus Heavenly Fire could only last for 5 years was that the flaming bar had to preserve its strength to face the pursuit of the divine realm at that time. Even if there was only a 1 in 10,000 chance of survival, she had to try. Otherwise, if she applied all her divine power to the Red Lotus Heavenly Fire and designed a formation to work on it, then the Red Lotus Heavenly Fire would certainly be able to exist for a long time. Perhaps this was also the way that the flaming bar wanted me to live. If the two continents were permanently separated, then I would follow her without any hesitation. Flaming bar, Flaming bar, you really put in a lot of effort. While Ji Dong was letting his imagination run wild, Lang Tianyi was not fooling around. After a short pause, he judged the situation in front of them through the pearl of thick earth. Then, he immediately activated the artifact again and led everyone forward from sinking to sinking. Ji Dong came back to his senses, looked at Tianji beside him, and nodded slowly. Tianji naturally understood what he meant. He held hands with Ji Dong, and Ji Dong's other hand naturally held Chen Xishuan's. With the combined strength of the three and their souls combined, their soul power was raised to the peak of the saint level. With such a powerful soul power as a cover, as long as Dark Tianji was not in this dark temple, they would be able to conceal their aura and not be discovered by anyone. It was almost impossible to pass through the wide moat by digging a passage 100 meters underground. Putting aside the fact that there were so many soldiers patrolling outside the Dark Temple, even if they could sneak in and dig, they would not be able to escape the soul detection of the Dark Temple. As soon as they entered the area under the moat, Ji Dong and Tianji discovered that there were strong soul waves even in the soil. They were at least at the saint level, although they did not know where the detection power of the saint level came from. They were more aware of the power of this Dark Temple. After all, it had been accumulated for more than 1,000 years. It was simply an extremely solid fortress. Of course, the saint-ranked probing ability was greatly weakened after going deep underground. Moreover, the saint-ranked probing ability was only at the initial saint-ranked level. It was enough for Ji Dong to protect everyone by himself, not to mention that the three of them were releasing peak saint-ranked soul powers at the same time. It was necessary to be cautious because the purpose of this trip was not to destroy, but to find the 2 water element artifacts so that they could reach the level of complete artifacts just by killing holy disciples. In this case, they had to be careful. Otherwise, once the Dark Demon army inside was alarmed, their collection of the 2 artifacts would be even more secretive, and security would be even tighter. The most troublesome thing was that no one could be sure that the Dark Tianji didn't have a way to teleport back here directly. If that happened, they might not have the chance to get their hands on the two divine weapons. How could they contend against the dark stem saints then? Therefore, for the sake of the two divine weapons, they had to be cautious. Before they found the divine weapons, they had to try their best not to be discovered by the other party. Fortunately, Tianji had the eye of heavenly secrets and was able to determine the location of the artifacts. Otherwise, they would not be able to find the artifacts at all. They did not know what method Dark Tianji had used to completely isolate the aura of the two water element artifacts. There was not a single trace of mana or soul waves. Even with the peak of the saint-level soul power of the three of them, Ji Dong could not sense the existence of the two artifacts. It seemed that even if Light Tianji's combat power was not good enough, he would still be one of the most important parts in dealing with Dark Tianji. Finally, they passed through the wide river that protected the Darkness Shrine. Ji Dong instantly increased the output of his soul detection, especially the detection of the surrounding soil. Together with Lang Tiany's Pearl of Thick Earth, they formed a double layer of insurance. Lang Tiany took a deep breath, and the sun crown above his head became exceptionally bright. He used the power of the Pearl of Thick Earth to slowly send everyone up. The heavenly stem saints also became more focused. With Ji Dong and the other two's combined soul detection, they could be said to know everything about the outside world like the back of their hands. When the Pearl of Thick Earth sent everyone to a position about 10 meters above the ground, Ji Dong signaled for Lang Tiany to stop temporarily. Before they reached the ground, he wanted to carry out one last careful investigation. At this moment, the position that Lang Tiany had brought everyone up to was a dark corner that Ji Dong had found with the help of his Fuse Peak Saint-level soul power. It was in the shadow of a tall black building. Through the coverage of his soul power, the Darkness Shrine had completely appeared in everyone's mind. Even Emoer was no exception. In order to prevent herself from crying out in shock, Emoer took out a piece of cloth from somewhere and took the initiative to tie her mouth. These heavenly stem saints had already shown her too many miraculous things. She did not know what new thing she would see next. If she was not careful, it would be embarrassing. All of a sudden, the Darkness Shrine looked like an incomparably huge city. Even the castles of the three strongest races in the core world could not compare to the scale of this place. Within the moat of the Darkness Shrine, there was a layer of black city walls that were 30 meters tall and 30 meters thick. Every 200 meters, there was a watchtower that was 100 meters tall. As long as the weather was good enough, one could easily see dozens of miles away. The watchtowers with pointed roofs looked like the fangs of the Darkness Shrine. They were daunting. Inside the city walls, there were tall buildings. However, all the buildings, including the stone bricks on the ground, were completely black. This Darkness Shrine was really full of darkness. Many of the tall buildings were more than 50 meters tall. There was a huge, eye-catching emblem on each building, which probably represented the purpose of these buildings. Compared to the map of the Darkness Shrine in Ji Dong's hands, the terrain here was much more complicated. Clearly, the martyrs who had rebelled against the Heavenly Secret Alliance had not been able to send out a panoramic view of the Darkness Shrine. Among these tall black buildings were wide streets. Each street was more than 30 meters wide, enough to accommodate 10 carriages abreast without feeling crowded. Even if a large number of troops were mobilized here, they would still be able to move freely. How was this a shrine? It was clearly a fortress. The fortresses built on the Holy Evil Island by the 5 nations of the Radiant 5 Elements continent were much cruder than this. Those black buildings attracted Ji Dong's attention. These buildings, including the black stone bricks used on the ground, were made of an extremely tough stone. Through Soul Probe, he could feel that this stone was at least 5 times harder than granite. With so many rare materials used to build such a city, it was no wonder that the Dark 5 Elements continent had been ruined to such a state. Just casting or cutting such hard stone alone would have required a lot of time and manpower. Looking in the direction of the center of the Darkness Shrine from afar, there was a huge Darkness Castle. It was also the most magnificent building in the entire Darkness Shrine. This castle was built on a hill that was about 200 meters tall. The hill was surrounded by water, and there was even a moat for the inner city. Chapter 591. The moat in the inner castle of the Dark Temple could even be said to be a small lake. The width of the water surface was even wider than the moat outside. At the top of the hill that was 200 meters high was the huge castle. The highest point was 100 meters high. It was completely black and even emitted a faint black light. Obviously, the building materials of this castle were different from the buildings outside. The heavy and oppressive feeling it gave the heavenly stem saints a great shock. What was it made of? There were a total of 4 watchtowers around the castle. These 4 watchtowers were not as tall as the watchtowers on the city walls outside, but it was these 4 watchtowers that constantly emitted layers of soft silver light that spread to the surroundings. When combined, it could cover the entire area of the Dark Temple. The saint-level soul wave that Ji-dong had sensed earlier was released by these 4 watchtowers. In other words, there were either 4 demon masters with saint-level souls who were constantly scanning the castle, or there was some special array or magic weapon. The civilians of the 5 Elements continent were in misery and suffering. They were so poor that they could not even fill their stomachs. However, there was such a powerful fortress in front of them that made the heavenly stem saints shudder. Even if there were millions of troops, it would be extremely difficult to capture this place. When Ji-dong mobilized his soul power to explore the tower on the hill, he realized that even his soul power at the peak of the saint level could not penetrate it. He immediately understood that the 2 water-type artifacts of the heavenly stem saints were probably in this castle. This was also the main reason why he could not detect it previously. Perhaps it was because the saint-level soul power scanning of the 4 watchtowers was enough to do all the detection work. Hence, there were no special patrols in the Dark Temple. Ji-dong could sense the existence of many humans through his peak saint-level soul power. However, there was not a single ordinary human in the vicinity of the Dark Temple. They were all demon masters, and all of them were at least 4 crowns. There was not a single one who had not reached 4 crowns. According to the dark priest that they had captured previously, there should be a dark demon army stationed in this Dark Temple. In other words, there were 10,000 demon masters. Could it be that there were only 10,000 people living in this Dark Temple that was like a small country? If there were foreign invasions, there seemed to be not enough people to defend. As Ji-dong thought about it, he transmitted his thoughts to his companions. To his surprise, the first to have a thought fluctuation was Mo-er. With Mo-er's current cultivation, it was impossible for her to communicate with Ji-dong's soul. However, she could think on her own. When she opened up her soul, Ji-dong could naturally sense it. Mo-er's thoughts dispelled the doubts in Ji-dong's heart. As it turned out, this Dark Temple was the holy land of the entire 5 Elements mainland. Without a certain level of ability and the approval of Dark Tianji, one could not live inside. However, there were more than 300,000 troops stationed outside the Dark Temple. This was the part of the area that they had passed through previously. All the reserve demon masters of the Dark Demon Army were among these 300,000 troops. There were 100,000 of them, in addition to 200,000 elite soldiers. If they really encountered any situation that they could not resist or an invasion, then these 300,000 troops could instantly return and support the interior of the Dark Temple. Moreover, although the Dark Temple looked calm on the surface, in reality, there were many defensive mechanisms that required demon masters to control. Just the various offensive and defensive spirit arrays alone numbered more than 1,000. Once demon masters controlled these spirit arrays, even if a 9-crowned demon master flew in the air, as long as he became the target of everyone, he would be instantly killed. Tianji sighed and transmitted his thoughts. No wonder the Dark Tianji is able to remain standing despite his brutal rule. The power he controls is just too great. How can those rebels, who do not have sufficient weapons, food, and support from demon masters, attack this divine temple of darkness? Ji-dong slowly nodded. He now somewhat understood Shan Lei's cautiousness. With a darkness shrine like this, it was normal for Shan Lei to not believe that he had the ability to affect the entire battle. At the same time, Ji-dong was also inwardly rejoicing. Fortunately, they did not choose to forcefully attack. Otherwise, if thousands of unknown offensive and defensive arrays were activated at the same time, even if there was a true Saint Rank powerhouse among them, they would not be able to resist. Go up. Jidong gave an order to Lang Tianyi. At the same time, he withdrew his soul power and only enveloped everyone's bodies. There was no silver light. Everything became pitch black, just like the color of the Dark Temple itself. Including Mo, there was a total of 11 people. They slowly rose from the shadow of the tall building and quietly appeared on the surface. The fresh air carried an indescribable special smell. As they breathed in, the heavenly stem holy disciples could not help but tense up. Now that they were actually here, they were not so nervous anymore. Every one of them had been through hundreds of battles and had experienced the tempering of the Dragon Valley and the core world. It was time for them to show their abilities. The most nervous one was Mo. She never thought that one day she would be able to enter the Dark Temple so silently. She did not have the ability to conceal her aura like the heavenly stem holy disciples did. She could only make her breathing as light as possible. At this moment, Jidong, whom she had originally hated, had become her greatest support. Compared to Dark Tianyi, this fierce man was clearly much more adorable. A faint light flickered, and a cold light appeared on Jidong's face. His body pressed against the wall behind him, and his soul scans slowly spread out. However, he did not expand the range too much. It only covered a diameter of about 100 meters. Only within this range could magicians who had reached a certain level of strength discover their soul power disguise. Jidong nodded at Tianyi. Tianyi immediately understood and deactivated the soul fusion. Tianyi alone released his soul power to protect everyone. Meanwhile, Jidong lowered his body and floated out like a wisp of smoke. He did not make a single sound. Jidong's choice of the building in front of him was very reasonable. This building was one of the largest in the entire Darkness Temple. More importantly, he had detected the presence of the most darkness magicians here, and none of them had a cultivation of more than 7 crowns. What was the easiest way to hide his identity in the Darkness Temple? Without a doubt, disguising himself as one of the dark magicians was the least likely way to be discovered. They appeared behind the building, and the door of the building was on the other side. Through the soul scan, Jidong had already discovered the purpose of this building. It was actually a tavern specially for the Dark Temple's magicians. Jidong quietly went around the sidewall and came to a place not far from the door. He continued to hide in the shadows, quietly waiting for an opportunity. Not long after, a middle-aged man in black walked out of the dark tavern. He was mumbling something as he walked towards Jidong. Jidong's ears moved slightly as he listened to what he was saying. So unlucky, I lost again. Ever since the preparations for the Holy War began, the money given by the higher-ups was already very little, and it was all won by these vampires. Damn it, when I get the money next time, I definitely won't gamble with them anymore. Although he said that he wouldn't gamble, who knew if he would really gamble or not? Of course, he didn't have that chance anymore. Seeing that the dark magician was about to pass him, Jidong quietly moved. The dark magician only felt his vision darken, and a huge suction force suddenly appeared, pulling his body horizontally. He subconsciously activated his mana, and at the same time wanted to shout, but his mouth and nose were instantly sealed by an inexplicable force. An unparalleled pressure, like the weight of Mount Tai, fell on his body, and he couldn't move at all. In the next moment, he also arrived in the shadow, where Jidong was hiding. The whole process didn't even take a second. Jidong's right hand grabbed his neck. This was only a 5-crown dark magician, and in Jidong's hands, he was just a small shrimp. Not to mention him, even if a 9-crown dark magician fell into Jidong's hands and was grabbed by the neck like this, he wouldn't be able to break free. Jidong's eyes flashed, and 2 silver lights fiercely pierced into the eyes of the 5-crown dark magician. With the soul force of a middle-level Saint Realm as a cover, it was impossible to see this silver light from the outside. The body of the 5-crown dark magician trembled violently. Although his cultivation was higher than Mo's, Jidong dealt with him with a destructive method, without any scruples. Almost instantly, he broke through the door of the other party's soul and forcibly scanned the other party's memories. When he retracted his soul force, this dark magician had already become a complete idiot. A faint black flame flashed and didn't emit the slightest magical fluctuation. This dark magician had already disappeared without a trace, and in Ji-dong's hands, a black magician's robe appeared. Using extreme fire to burn the other party's body without damaging the outer clothes, this kind of control was extremely difficult even for a 9-crown dark magician. But in Ji-dong's hands, it was as easy as taking a stroll in a courtyard. This was the control of a Saint Realm soul force. On the chest of the black magician's robe that Ji-dong had obtained, there were a total of 5 red flames, indicating that this dark magician was a 5-crown dark magician. Without asking, Ji-dong also understood that these symbols on the chest symbolized the identity of these dark magicians. Here, 5-crown dark magicians could only be considered a low-level existence. After all, in the Dark Temple, the lowest cultivation was 4-crown dark magicians. This identity made Ji-dong very satisfied. There must be a lot of 5-crown dark magicians, and with such a robe, it wouldn't be easy for his identity to be exposed. Ji-dong put this black magician's robe on his body. Although it was a little small, if one didn't look carefully, one wouldn't notice it. In addition to this magician's robe, he also had a black badge in his hand. There was an obvious magical wave on the badge. Ji-dong carefully probed it with his soul power, and was surprised to find that inside this black badge, there was actually a small magical formation. The design was extremely delicate. Although it was far from a powerful magical formation like the 5 Elements magical formation, it could be used in the badge to identify one's identity. It could be seen that the Dark 5 Elements continent's research on magical formations was much better than their continents. With Ji-dong's cultivation, he quickly sensed the function of the magical formation inside the badge. It recorded the name, rank, and position of the 5-crown dark magician. When a certain amount of magical power and soul power was input, even the portrait of the dark magician would appear on the badge. Also, it could block the soul power of the 4 sentry towers. It could be said that this badge was the proof of identity in the Dark Temple. Only dark magicians with this thing could enter. With this thing, it could completely verify the owner's identity in many ways. Presumably, when returning to the Dark Temple from the outside, they would use this thing to carefully check. Ji-dong stuffed the badge into his arms. As for the Darkness Crystal Crown, he had already sent it into the Vermilion Bird Bracelet. He returned to his previous position and waited quietly. In fact, he could totally leave this task to his partners. However, considering that it was the easiest to use fire magic to destroy the corpses, and this was an important step in entering the Dark Temple, he didn't do so. At this time, the sky had just darkened, and it was the busiest time in the tavern. After changing into his clothes, Ji-dong walked to the tavern in a dignified manner. He still needed 10 sets of clothes and 10 badges, but there was no need to rush. It was more important to find out some information inside the Dark Temple first. Perhaps it was because the security of the Darkness Shrine itself was too tight, but there were no guards at the entrance of the tavern. It was one thing to use the soul detection, but it was another thing to actually walk in. The soul detection could only obtain 3-dimensional colorless images and accurate signs of life. However, when one looked at it with their eyes, there were rich colors. As soon as Ji-dong stepped into the tavern, he was immediately attracted by the extravagance of the place. The tavern was completely a scene of gold and jade. The interior of the tavern was completely decorated with gold, silver, and gems. The floor was covered with a long scarlet carpet, and dark magicians in black magician robes were walking around, chatting and laughing. It actually looked like a social gathering of the upper class. The spacious hall was divided into many areas according to the different colors of the decoration. There were stairs on both sides that extended upwards, but there were specialized magicians guarding the entrance of the stairs. Ji-dong retracted his spiritual undulations and slightly lowered his head. He didn't have an outstanding appearance, so he naturally wouldn't attract too much attention. If it was Chun Sichuan instead, she would immediately become the target of everyone as soon as she stepped into the tavern. Chapter 592. Ji Dong pricked up his ears and listened to the conversations of the dark magicians around him. He walked around the edge and more or less understood the situation here. It turned out that this tavern was one of the few places of entertainment for the dark magicians in the Dark Temple. It was also the most common place for them to have fun. Generally, only the 7 crown magicians and below would come here. As for the 8 crown magicians, the 8 crown red-robed high priest and the purple-robe high priest of the tavern, they naturally had their own places to go. The entire tavern was divided into 3 floors. The first floor was the place for the 4 crown and 5 crown magicians to have fun. On one side of the hall were long tables with all kinds of wine and delicacies. On the other 3 sides, there were many leather sofas where one could sit and drink and talk. There were obviously more male magicians than female magicians in this tavern, but as long as the female magicians were slightly good-looking, they would be surrounded by many people. Seeing this situation, Ji Dong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't expect this dark temple to have a trend of one-night stands. He didn't know that the dark divination clearly stipulated that the dark demon army could only find a spouse within the dark demon army. Therefore, if these male dark magicians wanted to find a wife, they naturally had to choose among the female magicians. Of course, they naturally wouldn't let go of commoner women, but that was, if Mo, or how to describe it, she would definitely say that the dark demon army was more terrifying than locusts sweeping through a wheat field. There were 2 stairs on the first floor of the tavern, leading to the second floor. There was the entertainment place for the 6 crown magicians, and the 3rd floor above was the territory of the 7 crown magicians. The 6 crown magicians could have magical beasts, so their status was obviously much higher than that of the 5 crown magicians. Moreover, the 6 crown magicians could already assume the position of high priest in the dark demon army, and could command 104 crown and 5 crown magicians. Obviously, the most lively place here was the first floor. Because there were many people on the first floor, even the 6 crown magicians could be seen here. After all, the 6 crown female magicians were not young, and the 6 crown male magicians were naturally willing to find some young and beautiful female magicians to bed. Moreover, they obviously had an advantage over the lower-level male magicians, so they were obviously the most popular on the first floor. After a simple observation, Ji Dong already understood a lot. In this huge tavern, there were at least 1,000 dark magicians. He couldn't help but have a murderous intent. If he could get this area of effect super killing skill, as Ji Dong was thinking, suddenly, a fragrant wind came from not far away, and a somewhat charming voice sounded in Ji Dong's ear. "Little brother, are you alone?" When Ji Dong turned his head to look, he saw an extremely flirtatious woman come to his side, holding a red cocktail in her hand. It was the flaming Bar's Burning Passion, also known as Bloody Mary. At first glance, this woman seemed to be in her early 20s, but upon closer inspection, one could see the vicissitudes of life behind her pair of coquettish crimson eyes. She was about 7 meters tall, and her figure was extremely voluptuous. As she spoke to Ji Dong, she had already walked over, and the 2 peaks on her chest were like 2 mountains that were filled with oppressive force towards men. Her slender waist and exaggerated round buttocks were definitely the real killer of men. Of course, it was on the bed. What caught Ji Dong's attention the most was that this woman was wearing a black robe. There was actually a symbol of 6 crowns on it, showing that she was actually an extremely rare female 6 crowns magician on the first floor of this tavern. Ji Dong couldn't help but be a little puzzled. He wasn't considered handsome, so why would such a stunner like him? The eyes of the beautiful woman moved slightly, as if they could seduce a person's soul. Her eyebrows were overflowing with love as she said, "Young man, you look very strong. I wonder if you're just a wax spear that looks like silver?" Her voice was especially pleasant to listen to, and, coupled with that charming appearance, if it were any other man, they would probably immediately be unable to resist. Her words also caused the surrounding people to roar with laughter. Ji Dong frowned slightly. The situation in front of him was beyond his expectations. Becoming the target of public criticism was definitely not a good thing for him. As expected, plans couldn't keep up with changes. who knew that such a woman would suddenly appear in front of him. But very quickly, Ji Dong discovered that something was wrong. His perception was extremely powerful. Although he was facing this beautiful woman, his spiritual force was constantly scanning the surrounding dark magicians. He discovered that these dark magicians were looking at him without the slightest bit of envy or jealousy. Most of them actually revealed pity. Why pity? Could it be that they didn't think that this was a romantic encounter? Or was there something wrong with this woman? While he was thinking, the beautiful woman had already arrived in front of him. She very naturally hooked onto Ji Dong's arm and said, "Young man, why don't we go over there and have a seat?" As she said that, she pointed to an empty sofa not far away. Ji Dong nodded. It was better to get out of everyone's sight first. As for how to deal with this beautiful woman, he had countless methods. In front of him, there was no difference between a 6-crown devil and a 5-crown devil that he had killed before. As the beautiful woman spoke, her whole body leaned over. Naturally, what passed to Ji Dong was a soul-stirring elasticity and softness. If it wasn't for the fact that Ji Dong was used to being stimulated by Chen Xishuan, he was afraid that his heart would be beating wildly. This beautiful woman's attractiveness was definitely top-notch. It was not the slightest bit inferior to those foreign porn stars that Ji Dong had encountered in his previous life. In desperation, he could only follow this beautiful woman to the side. The beautiful woman's whole body was almost stuck to his body. Ji Dong's expression was a bit cramped, as if to tell everyone that he was indeed a virgin and had never seen this kind of world. "Don't kill me." At this time, a voice as soft as a mosquito reached Ji Dong's ears. Although the voice was so soft that it was almost inaudible, it set off a storm in Ji Dong's heart. His footsteps subconsciously stopped for a moment. Under the beautiful woman's pull, he immediately reacted and continued forward. At the same time, he also subconsciously looked at the beautiful woman. The magic in his body slightly moved, and he was ready to respond at any time. He was completely sure that this beautiful woman already knew that he was not a dark magician, but he really could not think of how this woman in front of him could see through him. After the shock, Ji Dong's mind suddenly fell into absolute calmness. In the face of danger, if he could not maintain his calm, it was very likely that it would bring about destruction. The more it was in this kind of situation, the more calmly he had to face everything. The beautiful woman seemed to be very satisfied with Ji Dong's reaction. When she saw that he was looking at her, she revealed a charming smile and even brought the wine glass in her hand to Ji Dong's mouth. Ji Dong cooperated and took a sip. His right hand moved, and he had already broken free from the beautiful woman's embrace. He moved his right hand to her waist and pressed his voice into the beautiful woman's ear. "Why would I kill you? Do you want to kill me in bed?" Although he could feel that the beautiful woman had recognized him from her somewhat nervous mood, he still had to hide it because he could not be sure that this woman in front of him was not testing him. At this time, the two of them had already arrived at the sofa. The beautiful woman gently pushed Ji Dong onto the sofa and then sat on Ji Dong's lap. Her full and perky buttocks ruthlessly ravaged Ji Dong, and her whole body immediately leaned on him. Her head also naturally moved towards Ji Dong's ear. "I know who you are because you have the fragrance that Mo Air left on you. Don't look at me. Just listen to me." The soft voice once again rang out in Ji Dong's ear. Ji Dong realized that the woman's lips did not move at all. He really did not know how she could make such a sound. She was even more skilled at forcing her voice into a line than he was. As if sensing the change in Ji Dong's emotions, the beautiful woman continued to stick to Ji Dong's body, but her voice continuously traveled into Ji Dong's ear. "Don't blame Mo Air. Even she does not know that the fragrance on her body has been specially processed by the organization. Anyone who comes into contact with her body will be stained with this smell. This is our organization's secret. As soon as you came in, I noticed the fragrance on your body. From Shanlei, I received news that you were coming. Since you were able to enter the Darkness Temple without anyone knowing, it has already proved that you have the ability to cooperate with us. I now officially announce on behalf of the organization that our cooperation has officially begun from this moment." Ji Dong was secretly surprised. This Heavenly Secrets organization was really powerful. It seemed that what Tian Shanlei had told him that day was not the truth. At that time, he had told him that the operation to infiltrate the Darkness Temple had failed. However, from the looks of it, that was not the case. Wasn't this beautiful woman in front of him the best proof? The beautiful woman continued, "Relax a little and be intimate with me." As she spoke, she actually pulled up one of Ji Dong's large hands and stuffed it into her bosom. Immediately, Ji Dong felt an astonishing elasticity and tactile sensation that he could not grasp with one hand. In that instant, Ji Dong's body immediately tensed up. It had to be known that he had been using his soul power to communicate with his companions all this time. Everything he did was watched by his companions. This was practically a live broadcast. However, he quickly calmed down, letting Si Xian see this was good as well. If this could make her dislike him, perhaps there would be a chance to solve the problem between the two of them. Thinking of this, he ruthlessly rubbed the beautiful woman's bosom twice. The beautiful woman moaned and fell into Ji Dong's arms. Her eyes were like silk, and it seemed as if water was about to drip out of them. You can rest assured, in this first floor, or even the second and third floor, no one will come near me. They're all very afraid of me. Do you know why? Ji Dong's lips moved slightly, and he asked why. The beautiful woman's voice and expression were simply not the same person. On the surface, she was as gentle as water, as if she was going to melt Ji Dong, but her voice was extremely cold. Ji Dong understood why she was doing this, and he could not help but admire this woman. Her cold voice was because she was afraid that he would really be aroused and cause irreparable trouble. She was using her voice to weaken his aroused desire. This was not an ability that ordinary people could have. To completely separate one's thoughts from one's desires was not something that ordinary people could do. That's because even though I'm a promiscuous woman, my chief lover is the 4th-ranked Purple Robe High Priest in the Darkness Divine Temple. If anyone touches me, even though they won't be killed due to the rules of the Darkness Divine Secrets, they'll definitely be castrated the next day. However, they won't be able to resist my power. Do you think they'll approach me? You are the exclusive property of the purple-robed high priest? Ji Dong was shocked. Although he did not show it on his face, his hand that was moving in the other party's arms immediately stopped. He lowered his head, and only the beautiful woman could see his eyes. When she saw his eyes, the beautiful woman was obviously stunned for a moment, and even her fake gentleness temporarily stopped for a moment. This was because she saw respect in Ji Dong's eyes. She had thought of many possible reactions from Ji Dong, but she did not expect it to be like this. It was indeed respect, to be able to infiltrate the enemy's world, and to be able to infiltrate such a tightly guarded darkness shrine. One could imagine how much this beautiful woman had sacrificed. Was she really a slut? No. Everything she did was to resist the darkness divination. For this noble goal, she did not hesitate to sacrifice the innocence that women valued the most. For a woman who was willing to pay such a huge price to resist the divination organization, how could she not be worthy of Ji Dong's respect? On the surface, she seemed to be a slut, but it proved her great character. The beautiful woman pressed down on Ji Dong's hand on her chest and said, "Come on, violate me. The more intense, the better. This way, no one will suspect anything. You don't have to do anything to me, and you won't be dirted. I know how much you've sacrificed for your organization, but everyone has something that they have to hold on to. You're a great woman. You should leave. I don't need your cooperation here. That will put you in danger. After all, you met me tonight." Ji Dong slowly and firmly withdrew his hand from her chest and transmitted his voice. "No, I don't have a right to do that, even if it's just acting. It's not because you're dirty. In my heart, you're many times purer than those self-righteous women, so I don't have the right to violate you. I know how much you've sacrificed for your organization, but everyone has their own things to hold on to. You're a great woman. You?" The beautiful woman was stunned. Looking at Ji Dong, there was clearly something in her eyes. She took a deep breath and forced herself to calm down. Sighing, she said, "Although we belong to 2 different continents or even 2 different worlds, I really see the light of dawn in you. Thank you for giving me this respect that I haven't seen in a long time. Chapter 593. The Absolute Lady looked deeply into Ji Dong's eyes. She moved a little away from him and said, I won't force you, but I have to remind you that if you try to enter the inner castle, you will have to wait for 2 hours. There are 10 high priests in purple robes living in the inner castle. 2 hours later is the time when they summon the evil witch to the inner castle to serve them. This is also the time when the inner castle's defense is the weakest. Be careful. After saying this, she suddenly stood up and kicked Ji Dong to the ground. She angrily shouted, You really are a spearhead made of wax. You haven't even done anything yet, and you've already come out after a few touches. Scram, and don't let this old lady see you again. Roaring laughter immediately spread throughout the tavern. Ji Dong lowered his head and awkwardly ran out of the tavern. Behind him was a wave of booing. However, he didn't feel the slightest bit of embarrassment or shame in his heart. Instead, he felt even more respect for that woman. Her ability to conceal herself had already reached the point of perfection. Such a woman was definitely worthy of the word great. Walking out of the tavern, he took a deep look at the gorgeous woman who was throwing a tantrum in the hall. Finally, he passed on a message to her. In 2 hours, you must leave this tavern as well. This place may become our target. At the same time, do not enter the inner castle. At this point, Ji Dong paused for a moment. His eyes met the beautiful woman's without any reservation, and then he sincerely said, Take care. After saying these last 2 words, Ji Dong observed his surroundings. Under the cover of his soul power, he once again disappeared into the shadows. In a few flashes, he had already returned in front of his companions. The heavenly stem saints looked at Ji Dong with a strange expression. It was clear that his conversation with the beautiful woman had affected them quite a bit. However, no one showed any ridicule towards Ji Dong. Even the words spearhead made of wax didn't affect them. Who was standing in the middle of the group, had tears streaming down her face. She covered her mouth with both hands to prevent herself from crying out loud. However, these silent tears were the most touching. Ji Dong walked to Mo's side and strengthened his defensive soul power. He silently rubbed her head and said, If you want to cry, then cry. It's fine. I'll help you isolate the outside world. Mo couldn't hold it in any longer. She turned and threw herself into Tianji's arms, crying loudly. As she cried, she choked out, Auntie, I thought you were dead. So you're actually here. Why didn't you tell me that Annie was here? Annie, how did you become like this? Through Ji Dong's spiritual sharing, she had also seen everything that had happened in the tavern. However, her reaction was beyond everyone's expectations. Clearly, Mo knew that beautiful woman. However, Mo throwing herself into Tianji's arms still shocked everyone. The one who had gone to comfort her was Ji Dong. Logically speaking, she should have thrown herself into Ji Dong's arms. However, in this kind of atmosphere, no one had the time to care about that. Tianji clearly had no experience in this kind of situation. He was at a loss and didn't know what to do. Meow Meow, who had been standing to the side, came over and grabbed both of Tianji's hands, putting them on Mo. There was a warning look on her face. Clearly, she was warning Tianji not to put his hands down. Instantly, an unprecedented scene unfolded. Tianji Baijia's face flushed red like a tomato. His awkwardness slightly diluted the heavy atmosphere before him. Tianji managed to calm himself down with great difficulty. In a low voice, he said, Amor, calm down. Our time is limited. You have to control your emotions. Strangely, when she heard Tianji's words of comfort, Mo's crying subsided a little. She raised her head, her tear-stained face extremely lovable. She murmured, Yin, did you know? My mother only has one younger sister, Annie. When I was young, Annie was the one who raised me. 6 years ago, Annie suddenly disappeared. My father told me that Annie was captured by the people of the Darkness Divine Temple. I was afraid that she was already dead. I was sad for a very long time. It turns out that Annie didn't die. She even snuck into the Darkness Divine Temple. Why is this world so unfair? Annie is such a good person, but she has to do such a thing here. Tianji said in a low voice, Do you look down on your auntie because of this? No, of course not. Mo shouted fiercely. Everything Annie did was for the organization, so that we could better deal with darkness Tianji. In my heart, she is the greatest person. Tianji smiled faintly and said, That's good. You're right. She's a great woman who's willing to give up everything for her beliefs. I've just seen her future, you can rest assured, because what I see is light. Her future is bright. There will definitely be a good ending. Really? Mo's beautiful eyes lit up, and her crying stopped completely. Tianji smiled. Of course it's true. Don't forget, I am also Tianji. I have the ability to see the future. I believe you. Mo nodded seriously. Her expression finally calmed down. Yao Qianshu transmitted his voice to Ji Dong. I didn't realize that our Tianji has the potential to be a fraud. How come I didn't realize that he was just predicting the future? Ji Dong smiled faintly and said, Maybe the words of heaven's will are the future. He transmitted his voice to his companions. Let's prepare here. I'll go get some more dark magician clothes and tokens. We'll move in 2 hours. After saying that, he silently disappeared. Miao Miao moved closer to Chun Sichuan and transmitted her voice. Sichuan, aren't you jealous? Chun Sichuan silently shook her head and smiled. I understood many things from Mo's auntie. I used to think that I was pitiful, that I couldn't be with Ji Dong. But after seeing her, I realized that there are many women who are much more pitiful than me. I should be satisfied. After all, I can still be with the person I love every day. Hearing Chun Sichuan's words, Miao Miao paused for a moment, then sighed. That's right. When that bastard was by my side, I didn't think much of it. But now that he's not by my side, I realize that being able to see that bastard every day can make me very satisfied. We women are really... Ji Dong quietly stood guard at the side of the tavern. As long as the dark magicians walked in his direction, they would disappear without a trace. There were more than 1,000 people in the tavern, so naturally, many left. In less than an hour, Ji Dong had gathered all the clothes and tokens he needed. He had his companions change into them and waited quietly. At this time, Mo's Annie walked out. She left alone. Clearly, the dark magicians inside didn't want to provoke the high priest because of her. As she walked, she shouted gloomily, What a bunch of cowards. I don't know if there's nothing down there. You don't even have the guts to hide from me. It's best if I drink you all to death. A bunch of bastards. If I had known earlier, I would have gone to find that old man tonight. Although he's not that useful, he can still make do. The gate on the other side of the moat is about to open. I don't know who will be serving that old man tonight. The more than 100 guards in the inner castle all act like someone owes them money. Isn't he just a 7-crown devil master? He's not even an 8-crown devil master. Yet he dares to give me an attitude. She walked away while cursing. Under the respectful gazes of the heavenly stemmed saints, this beautiful woman disappeared from everyone's line of sight. Her simple words gave the heavenly stem saints a lot of information. First, she emphasized the opening time of the inner castle. Second, she told everyone the ranks and number of guards in the inner castle. For the heavenly stem saints, this was what they needed the most right now. Let's go. Ji Dong waved his hand and led everyone forward stealthily. Mo's eyes were a little red again. One of her hands was held by Chun Sichuan, while the other was tightly holding on to Tianji. It was as if she wanted to find some comfort from him. Tianji also allowed her to hold his hand. He had a good impression of this young lady. After all, the two of them had unfortunate lives, so they appreciated each other. Under the guidance of soul detection, everyone tried their best to move stealthily in the shadows. Using the concealment of soul power, they gradually approached the inner castle. When they were about 500 meters away from the inner castle's moat, Ji Dong stopped on his own. In everyone's minds, dozens of red dots appeared. Clearly, there were many hidden guards here. The inner castle was the true core of the Darkness Temple. In other words, only the inner castle could be called the Darkness Temple, so the defenses were naturally tighter. Ajin came to Ji Dong's side and said softly, I'll go with you. Ji Dong thought for a moment, then nodded and said, I'll go with you. After leaving the Heavenly Stem Holy Disciples' overall soul protection, Ajin would easily be exposed to the saint-level soul detection of the inner castle's sentry tower. With Jidong following her, this would naturally not be a problem. The two of them moved stealthily like two ghosts. Jidong discovered that the cultivation of the hidden guards here was not weak. At the very least, they were at the 6 crown level. Some of the leaders were even at the 8 crown level. It was not difficult for them to kill a 6 crown demon master without making a sound. However, to kill an 8 crown demon master without making a sound would definitely be difficult. After all, reaching the 8 crown level was already a whole new realm. They were only one last barrier away from becoming a sovereign level expert. The two of them moved stealthily. Ajin's body was very low, while Jidong followed behind her. Very quickly, they approached the first hidden guard. That hidden guard was actually a black stone pillar. From the outside, there was nothing unusual at all. However, in Jidong's soul detection, there were clearly strong signs of life. In other words, there was a person hidden in this black stone pillar. Furthermore, this black stone pillar was inscribed with a defensive spirit matrix. Jidong and Ajin exchanged glances. Ajin pondered for a moment and revealed a trace of hesitation. Killing the person inside the stone pillar and destroying the stone pillar were not difficult. The difficult part was to prevent that person from activating the defensive spirit matrix the moment he was killed. Furthermore, she was also afraid that the defensive spirit matrix itself was a triggering type. Once her attack affected the spirit matrix would automatically activate. If that happened, then they would immediately be exposed. Jidong gestured to Ajin, indicating that he would take care of this problem. Ajin's eyes flickered slightly, and Jidong understood that she was asking if he was confident. After nodding slightly, Jidong had already dashed out nimbly like a leopard cat. Due to the concealment of his saint-level soul, and the fact that it was nighttime, coupled with the fact that he was dressed in black, if anyone wanted to discover him, they would have to have a stronger soul than him, or if they were very close to him. With Jidong's deliberate concealment, even when he reached the hidden post still did not react. A layer of strange light was released from Jidong's body. Ajin was sharing her soul detection, so she could naturally see what Jidong was doing. When she saw this strange light, she immediately understood. Jidong's right hand quietly pressed against the stone pillar. The moment his palm touched the stone pillar, he understood that Ajin's worries were indeed true. The spirit matrix on this stone pillar was a triggering defensive spirit matrix. In other words, as long as you touched it or attacked it, this spirit matrix would immediately be activated. It was clear that even if you discovered me, the hidden guard, you couldn't do anything to me. But was there really no other way? Jidong's right hand had already pressed against the stone pillar, but there was no reaction from the stone pillar, and the defensive spirit matrix was not activated. The reason was simple. The strange light that shone from Jidong's body was the element stripping demon domain of his 3 demon domains. In an instant, the entire stone pillar, along with all the mana of the hidden demon master, was completely stripped by Jidong. If there was an 8 crown demon master inside, perhaps Jidong would not be able to kill him in one blow. But the stone pillar was protected by this spirit matrix, and there was only a 5 crown demon master inside. Among all the hidden guards, he was the weakest. In an instant, the element-stripping demon domain was drained of mana. The demon master inside only felt dizzy. Before he could understand what was going on, he was already engulfed by the black ultimate in fire. There was still no sound. Jidong's god-killing strike could not only pass through the surface of the human body, but could also pass through the stone pillar effortlessly. With the combination of the element-stripping demon domain and the god-killing strike, even a 9 crown demon master would tremble in front of Jidong, let alone a mere 5 crown demon master. And the stone pillar that had been drained of all its mana, even if it was touched, it would not have enough mana to activate its own defensive spirit matrix. Ajin and Hyoheim gave a thumbs up. Their lips moved slightly, but they did not make a sound. But they were saying the word perfect. Chapter 594. Ajin Hyoheim gave him a thumbs up and praised him for being perfect. At this time, she was not wearing that eye-catching golden armor. Her exquisite and graceful body was wrapped in the black, dark magician's robe. She looked quite flirtatious. The second hidden trap was less than 50 meters away from the first. It did not return to the stone pillar, but to a large tree. God knows how this tree grew so thick in this place that was shrouded in darkness all day long. In any case, there was someone hiding inside. After all, there are very few dark equips that could be protected by magic arrays. This time, it was naturally Ajin's turn. Ajin's body almost skimmed over the ground. He only pressed his right hand on the ground, and Hyoheim's movement indicated that this was already settled. As for the one in the tree hole, a thick metal spike pierced his body from below at lightning speed. It nailed into his skull and even pierced his tongue. He did not even have the chance to scream before his life was gone. Just like that, the two of them easily cleared out all the hidden traps in the surroundings. Soon, they were only 100 meters away from the moat. The 3 8-crown demon masters that Ji Dong had detected before were all nearby. At the same time, there were also more than 10 6-crown demon masters that were densely packed in this area. If they wanted to reach the moat, they had to get rid of these people. Otherwise, with the existence of the 8-crown demon masters, when they passed by here, their soul power might not be able to cover up. Ji Dong and Jin gathered together, and the two of them communicated directly through their souls. "What should we do?" Jin Hyoheim asked. She was not confident that she could get rid of an 8-crown magician without alerting the other 2 8-crown magicians. Ji Dong thought for a moment and said, "I'm afraid we have to take a risk. I can split them into individuals. How long do you need to get rid of an 8-crown magician?" Ajin said, "At most 10 seconds. Ji Dong nodded and said, "All right, then 10 seconds for one. Later, I will guide you in the order of attack." Thunderbolt. "I understand," Jin said. Ji Dong had always understood that it was extremely easy to work together with smart people. In the next moment, his soul power that was originally protecting the two of them quietly expanded. Without a sound, it had completely enveloped the entire area. Streaks of silver soul light threads swept out from the ground, expanding along with the soul power. From the ground, even from under the soil, it had completely enveloped the entire area. The reason why Ji Dong had asked Ajin about the timing of his attack was that he couldn't be of any help. There were saint-leveled soul scanners outside, and he had to deal with them. At the same time, he had to help Ajin separate these hidden guards so that they couldn't take care of each other. This required Ji Dong to release all of his soul power. Under such circumstances, Ji Dong couldn't join the battle. Otherwise, he would be discovered by the soul scanners outside. Without any warning, all the silver light threads suddenly rose from the ground and completely enveloped the entire area. Only Ji Dong and Ajin could see these light threads. With Ji Dong's deliberate concealment, no outsider could discover them. This was his mental demon domain, Silver of Dreams. Streaks of silver light threads quietly wrapped up the hidden guards. However, they still didn't know that everyone had been isolated by this strange mental demon domain. Even if there were violent explosions around them, they definitely wouldn't be able to hear it. The scenery in front of them wouldn't change either. This was the power of the mental demon domain, and it was also one of Ji Dong's wonderful applications. In the next instant, Jin had already moved. This time, she didn't hide her aura at all. She released all of her mana. Other than not wearing the golden armor, she was now a light saint in her complete form. With the full protection of the Silver of Dreams and Ji Dong's soul power, Ajin didn't need to worry at all. In the blink of an eye, she had already taken care of the 4 6-crown demon masters who passed by. Until the moment they died, they didn't notice Ajin's existence. They were completely immersed in the illusion of the Silver of Dreams. In less than a breath's time, Ajin had already arrived in front of the first 8-crown demon master. Blinding golden light suddenly shone, and Ajin's right hand had already turned into a golden longsword, stabbing towards the opponent's chest. Against an 8-crown demon master, using the spikes that protruded from the ground was unrealistic. The opponent would definitely sense it, so Ajin simply attacked head-on. The cultivation of an 8-crown demon master was indeed incomparable to that of a six-crowned demon master. In the instant that Ajin attacked, he still couldn't see anything, but he felt a strong sense of danger. Without hesitation, he covered his chest with both hands, and the mana in his body completely erupted. The dense yellow light had already formed a huge ball of light that enveloped his body. This was an 8-crowned Earth Demon Master. Although he wasn't wearing a red robe, his cultivation was at the level of a red-robed high priest. There was an explosive clang, and the 8-crowned Earth Demon Master cried out in pain. His body was sent flying backwards, crashing heavily into a large tree behind him. The layer of yellow light protecting him cracked like an eggshell and then exploded into countless specks of light with a boom. Under the attack of Aegon's 9 crowns demonic power and Saint Tyr power, the fact that he was able to withstand this attack without dying was already a testament to his strength. Even so, he spat out a mouthful of blood. This 8-crowned demon master could be considered shrewd, and he didn't panic in the face of danger. With a flick of his right hand, a bamboo tube was instantly thrown out. It was clearly something like a signal. At the same time, he rolled on the ground lazily. He didn't have the time to shout, and pressed his right hand against the ground without even turning his head. A huge rock instantly appeared behind him, and the only thing he could think of now was to escape. From the first collision, he could already sense the cultivation of his opponent, who was a supreme being. Wouldn't he be tired of living if he didn't run? How could Ajin let him escape from her hands? Her eyes flashed, and her body soared into the sky like a golden bolt of lightning. She pressed her right hand against the air, and a golden light instantly condensed into a huge hand in the sky, grabbing the bamboo tube that had flown into the air. At the same time, her body made a beautiful arc in the air, and the golden sword in her hand that was formed from mana slashed down from above. At this moment, Ajin's murderous aura had completely burst forth. Jidong, who was hiding in the distance, hurriedly increased the concealment ability of the silver demon realm of fantasy. He was afraid that Ajin's mana would leak out and be detected by the saints in the air. Amidst the sonorous explosion, the huge rock had already been cut in half, and the 8-crowned demon master rolled again and rushed forward 5 meters. As he soared up, he threw his left hand behind him, and it was actually a scroll. This 8-crowned demon master's adaptability could not be said to be unintelligent. Every 8-crowned demon master who had reached the divine master realm cultivation would always have a few trump cards that they were good at, and he was no exception. The scroll that he threw out was a tyrannical sure kill skill. Although it hadn't reached the level of a super sure kill skill, it was very close. If he had successfully released it, he would still be able to slightly delay Ajin, and with the strength of his 8-crown cultivation, he would be able to run very far away. Unfortunately, he did not know that he was not only being chased by a 9-crown demon master, but at the same time, he was also trapped in the mental demon realm of an even more terrifying demon master. Therefore, when he threw out the scroll, he was already dumbfounded. This was because Ajin had appeared in front of him. The golden long sword turned into a bolt of lightning and instantly sank into the space between his eyebrows. The scroll that he had thrown out was also wrapped up by a strange light. The triggering mana that had been applied to the scroll was instantly sucked out, and the scroll closed. It could not be successfully activated at all. Ajin's figure flashed, and he grabbed the scroll. Without stopping, he had already pounced in another direction. How could the 8-crowned demon master escape from the silver demon realm of fantasy? Under the influence of the demon realm, he didn't even know where he had turned. The scroll was thrown in the opposite direction, and he was also rushing towards Ajin. It would be strange if he didn't die. In the silver demon realm of fantasy, Ajin had Jidong's soul to guide her. It could be said that she was like a fish in water. Jidong did not rush her to attack the other 2 8-crowned demon masters. Instead, he guided Ajin to kill the 6-crowned demon masters in seconds and obtain their dark crystal crowns. Then, he arrived in front of the second 8-crowned demon master. This time, Ajin encountered an opponent of the Gue water element. She was also an 8-crowned female demon master. She looked like an old woman with wrinkled skin and white hair. Moreover, this old woman wore a crimson robe. It was obvious that she was a red-robed high priestess. The golden light was no different from before. It appeared in front of the red-robed high priestess, with the silver demon realm as a cover. Before the sense of danger appeared, the red-robed high priestess naturally did not react at all. However, her sense of danger was clearly stronger than that of the previous 8-crown demon master. Her reaction speed was also faster. 3 layers of thick ice shields were formed almost immediately. At the same time, a purple armor appeared on her body to protect her body. At the same time, she let out a shrill cry. Her body flipped backwards, and her feet kicked out. 2 blades went around the ice shields from both sides and went straight in Ah Jin's direction. This response could even be called perfect, as expected of the red-robed high priestess. In terms of combat ability and cultivation, she was much stronger than the previous 8-crown demon master. Unfortunately, the red-robed high priestess did not know that when Ah Jin attacked this time, Jidong had given her another instruction: destroy. Destroy the demon realm. Ah Jin possessed a powerful auxiliary demon realm. A blinding white light instantly bloomed on the tip of the golden sword, and with a flash of white golden light, it disappeared. In the face of absolute power, everything could only be in vain. The red-robed high priestess had not finished flipping her body, but the demon realm that she was about to release immediately stopped. The golden sword light flashed, and it pierced through her lower jaw and out the top of her head. Her entire body was pierced through in the air. The center of the 3 layers of ice shields was completely pierced by the golden light, but the ice shields did not even have a crack. It was clear how terrifying the piercing power was. As for the 2 attacking blades, Ah Jin did not even dodge. Under the influence of the silver demon realm, it would be strange if she could be hit. Ah Jin waved her right hand and took the rather good 8-crown darkness 10th water crystal crown. Ah Jin thought to herself, Bao Er is lucky this time. Although she thought this, her body had already pounced towards the last target. At the same time, Jidong sent a signal to the other Heavenly Stem holy disciples to advance. The last 8-crown demon master, Ah Jin, did not attack in the same way as before. She stopped when she was still 30 meters away from her opponent. Golden light flashed in her left hand, and a giant bow appeared. She pulled her right hand back, and a golden sword appeared on the golden string of light. Strong metal demon power instantly condensed, and a dot of white light appeared on the arrowhead. In the next moment, golden light flashed, and the 8-crown demon master did not even have time to react before she was instantly killed. She was pinned to the ground. Ah Jin also took the crystal crown and returned to Jidong's side. She smiled. Her cold face, which had been filled with murderous intent, was like a blooming spring flower. Jidong could not help but be stunned. It feels good to work with your silver demon realm of fantasy. If you did not remind me, I would have forgotten to use the demon realm of destruction. It is a pity that you did not allow me to use the golden ring of extermination. Otherwise, they would have died even faster. Jidong was not used to Ah Jin's excited expression. He said, God weapons cannot be used easily. On our god weapons, the aura of light is too strong. It will be easily discovered by the opponent. Don't worry, there will be opportunities for you to use your full power. The Heavenly Stem holy disciples had already caught up. Under Jidong's signal, Meow Meow used her own earth demon power to sink the corpses into the ground, covering up all the smell of blood. Only then did Jidong retract the silver demon realm of fantasy. He did this with complete reason. God knew if the saint-level detection in the air could detect the smell of blood and the corpses that had lost their vitality on the ground. Although it was a little troublesome, it was safer this way. Without the hidden posts, the 11 of them quietly snuck to the side of a few big trees near the riverbank. Here, Jidong could clearly feel the intensity of the detection in the castle increasing. Obviously, the saint-leveled soul scan was getting stronger the closer it was to the target. Jidong looked at the 4th century towers and narrowed his eyes. He thought to himself, I don't know how these things were formed, but they shouldn't be man-made. Otherwise, when Darkness Tianji launched the Myriad Thunder Calamity Realm, He would have brought 4 saint-leveled experts with him to protect him. If it was the effect of a Dharma array or some celestial artifact, then he must try to destroy this thing after obtaining the divine artifact. Next time, it would be much easier. He wouldn't be too ambitious and think that he could destroy the divine temple of darkness this time. If the first time wasn't enough, he could try again. If the second time wasn't enough, he could try a third time. They had a year and a half. It took them about 15 minutes to clear out the hidden posts. The 2 hours that Annie and Mo had mentioned were almost up. Ji-dong was not worried that the dark magicians who had sent the women over would discover that the hidden posts did not exist.